I am just a RPG player. One day, the system informed that the game was simply over. But I invested a lot of money in my account.
My city's gonna tell you the tale. Everyone was left in the veil. My time won't come to.
Then she appeared and completely changed my life.
The damage is already done. Take a look around, it's a war zone. The damage is already done. Take a look around and keep your guns high. It's a war zone. It's a war zone, and I'll be fighting for my life. So keep your guns high. It's a war zone. It's a war zone.
Here is Shin Yoo-jun, an ordinary young man in his 20s who enjoys gaming, just like many others. Currently, his favorite game is War of the Gods, a grand game full of adventures. Everyone has experienced playing an online RPG at least once. The feeling of creating your first character, heading to the central square to play, and having a character that stands out from the rest is simply amazing. Shin Yoo-jun's character is that high-level type. In recent years, Shin has spent quite a bit of money on the game. Among his friends, many considered him pathetic for investing time and real resources in games. He lost friends and was criticized for it, but he considered this reaction natural and couldn't do anything to change it. Shin enjoyed spending hours on the computer playing, feeling like a high-level warrior who had invested a considerable amount of money. His nickname in War of the Gods is Free-to-Play Player. His character looks good, performs well, and has incredible armor, which gives Shin a sense of satisfaction every time he plays. Seeing his overwhelming performance, he doesn't regret having invested so much money. The only problem Shin sees in the game is the low number of players. Usually, there are only the same 6 players online. Even on the server's opening day, there wasn't a large audience, and over the days, this number decreased considerably. War of the Gods is a medieval-style RPG set in a distant land filled with villages, taverns, castles, farms, and of course, magic. Because it is not very popular and consumes so much of Shin's life, he ended up forming bonds with other game users. They talk about anything, whether related to the game or not. Today, Shin arrived late and his friends missed him. He explained that he hadn't slept well the night before and had just woken up. The user Hot Pink Bunny asked if he had eaten properly, and he replied that he had, even planning to order some delivery food later. Shin asked what his friends were doing at that moment. Hot Pink Bunny replied that they were just gathered in the square, chatting, and asked if he had any ideas on what they could do. Another player, known as Joseph Moda Hongdae, noticed Shin's presence and asked what he was doing there. Since the previous day, he had thought about quitting the game for good. He knows that the free-to-play player always says he's going to quit but never misses a day, as if he were clocking in for work. Shin reminded Joseph that he had said something similar about quitting, and he, embarrassed, replied that quitting now would be a big waste after so much time. The player nicknamed Extreme Interpretation First Sword Joseon also greeted Shin and joked, saying that it seemed like Shin had just woken up and gone straight to the computer to play. Shin replied with a hello to Extreme Interpretation First Sword Joseon. The user Only I Don't Have a Cat, whom Shin considers his closest friend, also greeted him. The two are inseparable, especially during raids or group hunts, as they have excellent synergy. Hot Pink Bunny asked what they could do at that moment, and Joseph suggested that if she was bored, they could work on some accumulated raids. Hot Pink Bunny didn't like the idea much, as she hates that kind of task, believing it's what drove players away. The difficulty, according to her, is ridiculous. Shin recalled that the server never had many players and that the game was never popular. Joseph agreed, adding that the game had been bad since day one, as well as the management. Hot Pink Bunny always found the game's balance strange and was initially impressed, thinking, wow, is there a game like this? However, despite all the flaws, they continue playing day after day, as if there were some cognitive dissonance. Shin mentioned that they are there precisely because of the difficulty, as that's what brings the excitement when they achieve a goal. First Sword Joseon agreed, saying that if it were easy, he would have quit a long time ago. He joked with Shin about the rumor that he had made a lot of money with Bitcoin or something like that. Shin, jokingly, confirmed, saying yes. Hot Pink Bunny teased, saying that everyone knew except him. First Sword Joseon commented that he had heard about it but thought it was a lie. He never imagined anyone would spend hundreds of millions on such a bad game, which is why he keeps losing. Hot Pink Bunny joked, telling him never to try competing one-on-one with free-to-play player because despite the nickname, his gear is divine. She called him a true cheater. Shin replied that his heart will always be free to play. He took the opportunity to ask Hot Pink Bunny about her move to Bupyeong. As they chatted, a system window opened announcing an important notice. Shin watched the computer screen, intrigued by seeing a real-time announcement for the first time. The next window said, "Dear users, it's a pleasure to meet you. I have a brief announcement. War of the Gods has been selected for a competition. All thanks to you." The characters observed the system window with attention. Moda Hongdae asked if it was really the administrator, and the system confirmed that it was. Hot Pink Bunny asked if this meant the server was shutting down or something, and if they could continue playing. The system responded that it regretted to inform them that the server was scheduled to close soon. The reaction of indignation and despair was unanimous. Everyone found it unfair, especially the sudden news. First Sword took the lead, saying they couldn't end like this, and asked what would happen to free-to-play player who had invested enough to buy several apartments in the Heart of Seoul within the game. The system replied that he needn't worry, as players who bought paid content would receive a reward appropriate to their contribution. Free-to-play player was frustrated and found the situation irritating. The system also announced that there would be suitable compensation for all users who had enjoyed War of the Gods up until then. First Sword asked the administrator for details about this compensation, considering the server's imminent closure. Without further answers, the next pop-up windows from the system only warned that the server would close soon, starting a 5-minute countdown. Hot Pink Bunny, indignant, complained that the administration was terrible for shutting down the server so abruptly. Only I Don't Have a Cat couldn't believe what was happening and considered it a bad joke. Shin was left staring at the computer in shock as the system announced that the server would shut down in just 3 minutes. He knew it was inevitable and that every game eventually closed its servers. Everything has a definite end. There was no reason for much disappointment. He reflected on the time he had dedicated to the game, the adventures with his friends, and resigned himself momentarily. The system window announced that the server would shut down in 10 seconds. Then, a voice called out to protest the situation. Shin opened his eyes and looked at the screen. He saw his character from behind looking at something within the game. He wondered what was happening because the time had run out, but the window seemed frozen. Then the figure of a woman appeared on the screen, with the name Nell above her. She wore a white cloak illuminated by a strong bluish light. The name was familiar. Could she be an administrator of the game? Shin began typing quickly, asking if she was an administrator and what was happening. Then Nell started to speak. She began by expressing her personal gratitude to free-to-play player. Shin, not understanding, asked the reason for all this. Nell replied that he had generously supported the world she created without hesitation. Shin explained that it wasn't exactly a donation, but rather a payment for something he was using. Nell said that didn't matter, because thanks to him, her work reached the minimum qualifications to participate in a contest. Shin then asked what contest it was, as he had just searched the internet and found no game contests happening at that moment. Nell replied that she couldn't disclose the details at that moment, but due to free-to-play players' help, she considered offering more than a simple reward, a true special privilege. Shin quickly typed asking what this privilege would be, but Nell didn't explain. She only said for him to enjoy the pleasure of receiving and discovering the special privilege on his own. She added something important, looking directly at him through the screen. She indicated that he should accept what would happen at that moment, regardless of what it was, and try not to look suspicious, as this would be useful for his survival. Then the monitor simply shut off. Tense, Shin stared at the dark monitor, pondering what had just happened, considering that he had made eye contact with that woman. He relaxed in his chair and pushed the thought out of his mind, concluding it wasn't possible. However, he questioned why the monitor had turned off. Then, something surprising occurred. A system window appeared right in front of Shin, beyond his seemingly turned-off computer screen. It stated that a change would happen at that moment, and for him to prepare for impact. The environment around him began to spin. He felt fear, not understanding what was happening. His head started to feel strange until he found himself in a completely dark and empty space. A new floating window opened above his head, creating suspense about the reward Shin had just received. Below it, another window announced that Shin Yujun now possessed the entire inventory of the free-to-play player, and that this was being bound to his soul and synchronized. There were exactly 5 years, 8 days, 5 hours, and 32 minutes until full synchronization. Now, the game War of the Gods was truly about to begin. In the Divine Kingdom, a hidden dimension separate from Earth, stood the majestic Ortine Palace, home to the lesser gods. The radiant walls and winding corridors exuded an ancient power. On that day, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation as a grand event was about to take place, the announcement of the results of the War of the Gods. All the inhabitants gazed anxiously at the sky, where an immense floating window of light began to form, its celestial glow shimmering like stars. Silence fell over the crowd as the names started to appear. When the results were finally revealed, a murmur of astonishment and disbelief swept through those present. Nell, a 7th-class goddess, had claimed first place in the War of the Gods. All eyes turned to Nell. Amid whispers of surprise and envy, many questioned how an unknown goddess had surpassed gods of such high rank. Each victory in the War of the Gods brought unimaginable benefits, and Nell was about to discover what that meant. The euphoria in her heart pulsed along with disbelief, for she knew that her victory had a deeper story, one that involved Shin Yu-jun, a gamer whose real name was little known in the Divine Kingdom. The War of the Gods, hastily organized, had been a disaster. Poor management and the high level of difficulty drove many gods away, making it almost impossible for them to gain divine power. The gods, desperate to sell their premium items, were in a constant struggle to make money and participate in the competition. Nell, as a 10th-class goddess, was almost invisible in this scenario. She had neither resources nor influence, and her despair grew with each passing day. It was in this abyss of despair that Shin Yu-jun appeared like an unexpected comet. Nell's darkness was pierced by a ray of hope when Yu-jun began buying items in overwhelming quantities: shoulder armor of strength, concentrated mana potions, flame-resistant garments, speed boots, dragon horns, all limited editions. Each acquisition made Nell's heart beat faster. She watched, incredulous, as her standard of living transformed before her eyes. Shin Yu-jun, the F2P player, was changing the course of her existence. Determined to learn more about her benefactor, Nell investigated Shin Yu-jun's life. He was a young Korean, single and orphaned, who had recently become wealthy thanks to virtual currency. Realizing her good fortune, Nell decided she would do everything in her power to help Yu-jun become the strongest person on Earth, which was undergoing great transformations. She knew this would be advantageous for both him and her, as he would continue to be her lucky charm in the future. In another part of that new realm, Shin Yu-jun found himself transported to a strange place. The sunlight, once blocked by the curtains of his room, now blinded him as he stood up, dazed. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was in a dense and mysterious forest, the shadows of the trees dancing around him. Ancient ruins emerged among the trees, and he recognized the setting from games he knew so well. A pop-up appeared before him, floating in the air like a digital specter. Synchronization complete. Inventory fully transferred. Confused and trying to process what was happening, Shin Yu-jun attempted to dismiss the system window, but to no avail. It couldn't be real. The interface of the game, War of the Gods, was right before his eyes, and the last thing he remembered before passing out was this same interface. He pinched his face and felt the pain, realizing it was not a dream. He continued reading the system window, which stated that he had acquired the trait composure for being able to stay calm. Was this the compensation the game operator mentioned earlier, he wondered. For a few moments, he thought he was going crazy. The game's reality had merged with his own. Checking his status, Yu-jun saw that he was at level 1, with special benefits and a legendary title that increased the effects of equipped items by 15%. He was perplexed. How could he have the title of Legendary Item Collector while being at level 1? It defied all logic. Opening his inventory, Shin Yu-jun saw that it was filled with weapons and equipment. He had expanded the maximum capacity by paying, and now all his items were there. The level restrictions were the same as in the game. He didn't know if the game had become reality, or if he had been transported into the game. His levels, skills, and titles were reset, but his inventory remained intact. Remembering the words of the system operator, he decided to trust and not doubt the situation. A new system window asked him to choose the difficulty level: beginner, intermediate, advanced, master, and hell. Shin Yu-jun had dedicated much energy to this game, facing arduous missions. The hell difficulty was a nightmare, but the rewards were unimaginable. Now his real life was at stake, increasing the risk even more. Determined to face the challenge, Shin Yu-jun examined the set of legendary armor he found in his inventory. He realized that this set would be his key to overcoming the hell difficulty. Resolute, he equipped the set on his body. Prepared for the challenge, Shin Yu-jun selected his equipment as requested by the system. Though the choice was difficult, he knew he needed to make a careful selection. However, the system announced that he hadn't chosen any weapons, and that the difficulties of the hell mode had increased, along with the rewards. Surprised but determined, he braced himself for the challenge. Finally, the system confirmed that he was ready, and the tutorial for the hell difficulty level would begin immediately. Shin Yu-jun, armed with courage and his legendary inventory, launched himself into the unknown, ready to face the deadliest challenges that awaited him. The fate of two worlds was now intertwined, and he was determined and confident that he would emerge victorious. In Tutorial Zone 1, the wolf area, the protagonist advanced cautiously. The place was a dense forest filled with trees so tall that their tops couldn't be seen. Gray wolves emerged from the shadows of the trees, racing swiftly after Shin. He was on the run, constantly looking back. Have they already caught up to me? If I underestimate the wolves that appear in the tutorial, I'll be on the ground in no time, he thought as he ran. The wolves, although not individual threats, were nearly unbeatable in group ambushes. They could quickly surround him, turning a simple encounter into a desperate fight for survival. Shin stopped and moved carefully, choosing his targets precisely. Every movement was calculated to avoid being surrounded. His only chance was to take each one down individually. He watched them intently as two approached with ferocity. When they got closer, Shin brandished his sword and with a single strike split the two that were pursuing him. The sound of the blow echoed through the forest, startling the nearby birds. The strategy worked better than he imagined. He would only be sure of its effectiveness by putting the plan into action. Shin looked at his intact arm, and even after taking down that huge wolf, he was unscathed. He observed his armor and sword, assessing the minimal damage sustained. So this is how defense works. I guess I can be a bit more daring now, right? The sword also demonstrated incredible power. As he admired his weapon, a wolf suddenly appeared behind him. Ah, damn it. There was one more. He cursed, reacting quickly to neutralize the new threat. With a precise and bold strike, he swung his sword and dispatched the last enemy. Only the sound of steel against the wolf's flesh was heard, and it fell heavily to the ground. Feeling confident, he reflected on his emotions after the initial battle. Even after shedding blood in his first battle, he felt calm. He pondered the sensation of cutting the wolf with his sword, surprised by the calmness that overtook him. Probably if someone saw him there, they would think he was a psychopath. He attributed this serenity to a mysterious trait, composure. Shaking off these thoughts, he focused on his mission. Now he needed to hurry and get out of there, as the longer he stayed in Zone 1, the more difficult it would become. He left Zone 1, his mind preparing for the future challenges awaiting him. The transition to Zone 2 brought him to a dark and silent environment, a graveyard. I finally made it, he murmured, looking around cautiously. System, you have arrived in Zone 2, the system's voice echoed in his ears, bringing clear instructions. Somewhere in this area is the golden key. Find it. He took a deep breath, aware of the dangers surrounding him. The problem at this point is that it's filled with undead, meaning a large number of walking corpses. If you don't crush their heads, they keep coming back to life, becoming true newbie killers. And since the location is a graveyard, there is an almost countless number of them. This is not something a common level 1 player can handle. Additionally, the location of the key changes every time you do the tutorial, so it's always a hassle. He waited a bit, and a cadaverous hand emerged from one of the graves, followed by others until the place was filled with glowing skulls. Relying on his enhanced agility from the effects of his items, he moved swiftly among the tombstones. These creatures were slower and weaker than the wolves in Zone 1. They weren't typical slow zombies. They moved as fast as an average adult man. He calculated his movements, dodging the approaching undead, and they didn't tire, which meant this was the beginning of an endless game of tag. Determined to avoid unnecessary confrontations, he focused on his objective, which was to clear the ones blocking his path as he moved. After an intense search, he found the key strategically hidden on a tombstone, just like in the game. He destroyed the tombstone, causing a large explosion, and grabbed the key. The system screen announced that he had acquired the key, but the system confirmation was followed by the need to prepare for the next challenge. Before facing the boss monster, however, a small complication arose. A horde of undead jumped on him ferociously. They came from all sides. He noticed the undead were dirtying his armor. He demanded that they stay away from him, then with another swing of his sword caused another explosion that pushed them all away at once, until he decided to keep the key safely in his inventory. Despite the temptation to immediately advance to the next zone, he pondered the opportunity to gain additional experience in Zone 2. There were still many creatures standing around, and he couldn't miss the chance to earn some easy experience points. Since Zone 2 had no time limit, he could make good use of his time. So he raised his sword once more, ready for more action. The protagonist gasped, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling upon him. His vision blurred and each breath was a painful effort. He lifted his head wearily, noticing the system screen. All monsters in Zone 2 had been defeated, and completion rewards significantly increased. He smiled wearily. The full completion of the zone yielded greater rewards, as expected. The reckless tactic of relentlessly running while fighting hundreds of zombies and skeletons had been exhausting but effective. His muscles were spent, legs trembling with fatigue. He decided a brief rest would be prudent before moving forward. Even with legendary equipment that enhanced his strength and agility, his health was still limited. With victory over the undead and feeling slightly rejuvenated, he headed towards the next area, the Werewolf Forest 1. He walked towards the tutorial portal stone, his steps echoing through the silent cemetery. The boss spawn point should be near the portal. He abruptly stopped as he sensed a threatening presence. He had to react immediately, for lurking in the shadows and smoke was the boss, thirsting for blood and roaring like an untamed beast. It wasn't a named monster, but the threat it posed was undeniable. There was no choice and no escape. He had to fight. The level 55 werewolf emerged with its gray fur and fiery eyes. They locked eyes for a few seconds before the creature lunged with incredible speed and ferocity. The protagonist barely had time to raise his sword to block the first attack. The impact of claws against blade resonated through the forest, sending shockwaves through his arms. The werewolf pulled back and attacked again, each move an explosion of speed and ferocity. He analyzed the creature's attack patterns, beginning to understand its movements. The werewolf surged with a terrifying barrage of strikes, each more powerful than the last. Keeping his composure, the protagonist held his ground, evading and blocking with calculated precision. Sweat streamed down his face, muscles burning with effort. Each blocked blow and executed dodge heightened the tension, the metallic clang of sword meeting claws echoing through the forest. Finally, he saw an opening. The werewolf's claws shattered with a loud snap. The creature roared in pain, momentarily recoiling. Knowing the werewolf's only remaining option was to bite, the protagonist prepared for the final attack. He thrust his wrist into the creature's mouth to block its fangs. The monster lunged, jaws opening in a rage-filled scream, only to be impaled by the sword he wielded. The protagonist held his position steadfastly, feeling the weight of the blade guarding him against the werewolf's strongest attack. The creature let out a muffled, agonizing howl, its strength draining away. With one last effort, he drove the blade deeper, finishing off the monster that fell lifeless at Shin's feet. The silence engulfed the forest. The protagonist, body sore and drenched in sweat, leaned against a tree, reading on the system window what would come next. The path was clear, but the journey was far from over. A portal opened before him, marking the end of the tutorial for that zone. Now that the portal was established, there should be no more respawns in that area. Shin was extremely tired, his body trembling with exhaustion. Fortunately, as expected, his equipment had made all the difference. Though it was starter gear, he wielded it masterfully. Shin lamented there weren't more beginner weapons as good as that one. Once he completed the tutorial, his stats would increase dramatically. He would have to bid farewell to the super novice setup forever. Now was the time to move forward, even if slowly, to the next phase. For a moment, he forgot about the importance of rewards, especially the key. He almost regretted advancing so quickly to that zone. After all, it meant an earlier and hurried confrontation with the boss. He felt it was close. Just ahead, within ruins, lay a golden chest, glowing with a radiant golden light. He inserted the key and opened it, hoping for something good to come. Inside the chest was a small golden sphere that Shin held in his hands. The system displayed its attributes as Samdan of long age. This rare item didn't have a specific grade, but offered a valuable additional property. Upon consumption, he would gain a random characteristic. He could hardly believe his luck in finding something so precious there. It was an extremely useful item in the early stages of the game, difficult to obtain even for experienced veterans like him in the War of the Gods. He wondered about the taste of the Samdan, but decided it would be wasteful to consume it now. It would be smarter to wait until he could equip an item with a luck option, increasing his chances of obtaining an even better characteristic. For now, he carefully stored it in his inventory. Level restrictions prevented him from equipping luck items, but he could increase his level through grinding. Curious, he decided to explore a bit more, hoping to find something more valuable. He climbed the stairs of the ruins and ventured out to explore the area further. He hurried to check the reward for completing the infernal difficulty. However, his efforts didn't yield additional fruits. Although a bit disappointed, he knew that the Samdan itself was already a great achievement. Shin reflected on the recent events. There was no point in pondering why things that existed only in the game were now real. What mattered was to keep advancing in the current situation. After finishing the tutorial, he headed towards the portal, feeling a slight nausea as he crossed it. The sight that awaited him on the other side was familiar yet surprising. He found himself in the waiting room of the Tower of Infinity, a place he remembered well from the game. Something was strange, though. He should have been transported to Latine Village, the beginner zone. The game settings had changed with reality. Furthermore, his novice set had been removed due to level restrictions. He opened his status window, revealing impressive information. His level was now 31, a significant leap just from completing the tutorial. With infernal difficulty not being an easy task, he had accumulated a lot of experience. He decided to check his rewards. Among them were titles and valuable items. A title called Pathfinder increased experience by 5%, while another, Tutorial Conqueror, increased all his stats by 7 points. These boosts were invaluable to him at the moment, but the true gem of the rewards was a legendary item box, an ultra-rare item that allowed him to select and obtain any desired legendary item. He remembered the monetary value of these items in the game, but now the priority was to survive and thrive in this new world. He knew that even if he opened the box and obtained a legendary equipment, he wouldn't be able to use it due to the level restriction. His inventory was already full of legendary equipment, and the answer was clear. He needed a rainbow sticker. This item, without a specific grade, reduced the level requirement to equip an item by 100 levels. Without hesitation, he decided to use it immediately, applying it to a level 130 weapon, the longsword of Koihem. As he held the sword, he felt a surge of power course through his body. Even among legendary equipment, the longsword of Koihem was significantly superior to his old sword. The difference lay in the level requirement to equip it, underscoring the importance of level in the game. For his safety, he needed to increase his level to a secure point where he could face the challenges ahead. He knew that this world was a reproduction of the War of the Gods world. Beginners with low levels wouldn't stand a chance of surviving in the near future. The world was unforgiving, with few veterans surviving due to the game's extreme difficulty. The protagonist then appears in the residential area for players below level 100 in the Infinite Tower. As he walks, he notices the lack of people around. Is this a dead end? I think I've been summoned to a place with no people nearby, Yujun says, looking around as he walks and hears voices coming from the other side of the alley. He thinks he might gather some information first and approaches the crowd. Wait a minute, something's not right. What is it? He says, noticing that everyone seems to be quite advanced, thinking they should have just finished the tutorial. He notices they all have very advanced equipment. Does it make sense for them to have equipment of this level? Also, they all seem to be at a very high level too. He wonders, extremely surprised by their clothes and armor. Even though he spent a good amount of time in hell difficulty, it should have been only a day or two at most. He wonders if he missed something. Hey, did you hear? Dozens of people died in this B-rank dungeon expedition, right? Says a man in silver armor to a woman with white hair and blue clothes with red armor, continuing to say that apparently only the main members and close associates of the guild that organized the expedition survived and probably betrayed the other members and fled, later making excuses about how lucky they were to survive. Anyway, for those who have more, things only get worse, you know. The man says there's no one to interrogate, even if it's a lie, because they are the strongest in the region. Now that 5th-year players are heading to hunting areas with good drop rates, only 1st and 2nd-year players are left in this area. Upon hearing this, Yujun becomes very confused and wonders what they were talking about, and 3 days later, he finds himself sprawled on a bench in front of a fountain, leaning back, sighing. The weather is dull but nice. 5 years. I never imagined 5 years would have passed. A player ahead looks curiously. According to the information he gathered over the past 3 days, 5 years ago, the Great Migration occurred across the entire planet. The Great Migration refers to the phenomenon where Earthlings who awakened player abilities were forcibly taken to the Infinite Tower. And it didn't end with just one occurrence, but continued to happen once a year. Yujin looks around and thinks, but it's strange. The worldview of War of the Gods wasn't just about the Infinite Tower. Why were we summoned here instead of the starting village? He finds it even stranger that he alone was summoned 5 years later. He wonders what the problem was and why he was the only one starting so late. I went through the hell difficulty tutorial and thought I was all set, but I'm 5 years behind the others? Seriously, what a disappointment. Our protagonist then stands up, clenching his fist in determination, as it is not in his nature to remain sad like this, and decides to think positively. I have an inventory that will make up for this lost time. If I list what I need to do, he says, and thinks that the first step is obviously to level up. The second is to find out about the intermediate tutorial. And the third is to reach level 50, because once you reach level 50, you can equip accessories and get stronger quickly. But even so, it was a flawed game, and apart from our group, there wasn't a soul around, no matter how hard he tried to find one. He observes the people coming and going in the alley with a serious and attentive expression, thinking it might be a bit difficult to adapt. Not only did the world change so suddenly like this, it's good that I was a veteran of War of the Gods. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to adapt. He continues to think seriously, crossing his arms, contemplating most of the information he obtained while playing the game and while traversing the corresponding residential area. He did not expect to start in this place, but they say the dungeon information and the names and effects of the skills are the same. Yujin thinks about all this as he enters an establishment. Do you serve food here? He then orders a portion of melon and an off-steak, sitting at the table to eat, and remembering when he went to a trader handing over a simple pair of boots. Another difference from the game is the price of items, I guess. I sold a useless piece of equipment and got 50,000 points. Then the man, upon seeing the object the protagonist placed on the counter, was astonished. Incredible! This is worth a lot! Jun then, after selling the pair of boots, won't have to worry about food and lodging expenses for a while. The item I sold was a heroic grade item left in my inventory. The name sounds impressive, but it was a mid-low level school uniform that anyone could get. He thinks, but still hears people saying that heroic grade items are rare. Anything above that is out of stock and can't even be bought. He reflects on whether it makes sense to think about this while waiting for his steak with a fork. And this is the reality. If you go to a dangerous dungeon recklessly expecting to get items, you won't have any cash shop. This is an advantage only I have, with various items from the virtue shop. All right. Jun lightly taps the table with the fork and stands up. I ate and bought low-quality potions too. It would be a waste to use the expensive potions from my inventory at low levels, he thinks, looking at his inventory while equipping his silver armor with blue and green fabrics and his sword with a red scabbard, adjusted at his waist, and arranging his gloves. Now that I'm fully prepared, shall we begin? Let's challenge the infinite tower with my real body, he thinks as he gets ready. There are multiple reasons why players climb the infinite tower. One of them is to live a more affluent life in the residential areas that become more luxurious as you ascend. Another reason is the demon god invasion. If no one can reach the top of the tower within 15 years, the demon god invasion will begin. Our protagonist then finds himself in a cave and starts running with his gaze fixed. If that happens, it's 100% guaranteed that this place will be destroyed. He then hears rapid footsteps and sees a creature running towards him, wondering how they got there. Then he notices several giant rats jumping at him and quickly slashes them all with his sword. Remembering that each floor of the tower has many dangers, and to advance to the next floor, you must pass tests or battles with monsters like these. The infinite tower that appeared in had a total of 50 floors. Back then, content development didn't progress beyond the 50th floor. I wonder what it's like here, Jun thinks, and then feels something stuck on his arm. Oops, was there another one? Even if it's low-level equipment, it's the best money can buy. The attacks of the one Saint floor monsters are no match for me. The giant rat was gnawing on his armor, and the protagonist then gets rid of it by kicking it away. Of course, I need to be more careful now, as I can get seriously injured if I let my guard down. Giant rats are famous for being persistent monsters. He then spots many red dots in the darkness of the cave and observes more closely. But wait a minute, what are those red dots over there? The system then warns that an enraged giant rat, Kunchi, has appeared. Jun looks at them with a bit of sweat on his face, feeling a little nervous. Oh, come on. A swarm on the first floor, isn't that too much? At the back of a cave, Jun continues fighting the giant rats, spreading their blood across the cave floor as he quickens his pace, running towards another rat that leaps at him but is easily defeated, causing another rat huddled in a corner to tremble in fear. Oh, I leveled up again, Jun says, kneeling down, observing all the rats he defeated, his face splattered with their blood, realizing that having a good weapon really makes hunting easier. Huh? The giant rat is fleeing? It didn't do that in the game? This is more realistic. Jun stands up and looks seriously at the fleeing rat. He then realizes that the challenge of the first floor seems to be over. The system alerts him again, this time about the second floor challenge. Upon reaching the second challenge, he sees several giant lizards and without delay strikes them with his sword, slicing them in half. Oh ho! Knockout with a single blow. Running through the field like this feels real, he says, running in the opposite direction of the lizards, noting that Koihem's long sword is definitely very powerful, and by increasing agility, it's the best for surprise attacks. But above all, what he finds truly exceptional is its overwhelming attack power at lower levels. Jun continues advancing against the lizards, slicing the head off one of them. Putting the rainbow sticker on this was an excellent choice, he says as one of the lizards attacks him with its weapon. Jun blocks the attack with his sword and force, managing to cut the lizard man's sword and then slices him in half. The second floor challenge is to defeat a squad of lizard men with high attack power for lower floor monsters, but this level of power cannot block Koihem's long sword. It's a pity the armor is low level. It's rare for challengers on the lower floors to be fully equipped with armor, as people usually only wear armor and boots when challenging this place. Jun still hasn't decided to leave the second floor, pondering whether he should search for the hidden lizard men, but the system alerts him about the third floor trial, and he soon moves on to the next challenge. The protagonist is then transported to a forest with large trees. Finally, the third floor, he says to himself as he walks through the place. Before challenging the third floor trial, there's a place Jun thinks is necessary to visit, a hidden dungeon with a huge reward. Since I started several years late, I need to make sure to clear all the hidden dungeons. I sincerely hope no one else has discovered this yet. He discovered the hidden dungeon of the third floor about 4 years ago. I was right when I started playing. "Hello, folks. I'm a newbie here who came to hitch a ride to the 3rd floor." Yujun waves to the players he encounters there as he approaches. Then a blonde man in light blue armor talks about the difficulty beginners face in adapting and asks the boy to just trust them. "Let's move quickly, so follow me," says the blonde elf-eared woman holding a staff with a red orb on top. The protagonist thinks they seem like a good group of 3 people and feels lucky they're taking care of a newbie like him. "This is the first time I've met such helpful people while playing," he thinks, smiling subtly with his eyes closed. But this was a misunderstanding. The system then alerts him. "You have been expelled from the group." Yujun widens his eyes and looks down. "Huh? What? Dead with a single blow?" Yujun, astonished, realizes there's a sword sticking out of his chest. The man had attacked him and then says with a malicious smile, "Anyway, are you naive or just stupid?" The blonde man then said, "We offered kindness to you, a stranger, without even asking for money, and you just blindly followed us?" The woman laughs at him, mocking that he must want to be robbed. Yujun, confused, seriously wonders why they deceived him. They wouldn't be after his money, since his equipment was for beginners. They were just malicious people who enjoyed tormenting the weak. He then quickens his steps, distancing himself from the group, and while struggling to escape, fortunately spots the entrance to a dungeon hidden by vines, thinking he was very lucky to find it. Thanks to that bad experience at the time, he started spending money on the game, so he thinks he might as well thank the idiots he encountered. "Let's see. I'm sure it was around here. I'm sure this is the place. Where's the entrance?" Yujun says, searching for the entrance and approaching the dungeon. Could it have been cleared and the dungeon entrance disappeared? He wonders while touching the walls, analyzing the supposed entrance to the place. 5 years have passed since the world changed like this. So maybe someone as lucky as he had discovered the dungeon. He thinks it might have been a wasted trip and there's nothing more to be done. He grabs his hair in frustration. Just as he takes another step, he feels the ground sink and open up. He screams as he falls and crashes face first into the ground, sinking slightly. Signs of people, right? Could it be this? The system then indicates that the protagonist had discovered the Supreme Alchemist's secret laboratory. "I knew it! Supreme Alchemist's laboratory!" he shouts, eyes wide open and blood trickling from his mouth. The system says again that he had discovered the High Ash dungeon. He never thought there was another hidden dungeon near the one he was aiming for. "Wait, let me recover first." He takes a regeneration potion from his inventory and drinks it, thinking how it tastes like strawberries. "I fell from there and survived. If my health was a bit lower, I could have died." He looks up, observing the large hole he just fell through. He had seen many dungeons related to sorcerer studies or laboratories, but this is the first time he encounters one related to an alchemist. He thinks it might not be a trap, but the real entrance, and that the grass and branches covering the entrance must be camouflage. There are clear signs of human involvement, indicating that someone had discovered this dungeon. Judging by the fact that the dungeon hasn't disappeared, it hasn't been cleared yet. For now, he says to himself, ready to draw his sword. He picks up a light blue glowing stone and throws it into a cave in the laboratory. Convenience item, a lantern that illuminates the darkness. Surprisingly, items like this can be quite useful. The effect is simple. It just lights up the surroundings of the user. Light! The small glowing stone then bursts into light, illuminating the entire cave. Anyway, I can't miss this unexpected opportunity. I just hope not to encounter anyone else. He begins to walk in the cave, followed by the floating sphere. This isn't a game, but a real dungeon invasion where lives are at stake. After walking a bit, the protagonist finds a large gate, and without wasting any time, pushes it open. If I encounter another player inside a hidden dungeon with special rewards, there will be a bloody fight. At the bottom of a dungeon, we find our protagonist, who, after opening the door, is now panting as he runs from several large monsters chasing him. It's rude to summon monsters at the entrance of a dungeon, and I can't handle this many, he thinks with an exasperated expression, and concludes that he has no choice but to use the points he has saved up. Open status window. A digital panel forms in front of his eyes as he continues running, thinking it might not be so bad after all. If he clears the whole place, he would definitely reach at least level 50 and be able to equip accessories. But for now, he needs speed. Let's invest everything in agility. As he sees the end of the tunnel, he runs towards the large rock blocking the passage, yelling at himself to stop. But he gets inches from the wall and can't stop. He jumps, propelling himself off the wall and performing a backflip, landing crouched with one knee on the ground and his sword plunged into the floor. I didn't expect that increasing agility so much at once would make it so hard to control my movements. At least I escape from the monsters and can catch my breath, he thinks as he watches the glowing sphere in the air. Yujun had no idea that using all his points at once would result in such a side effect. He thinks the experience was quite stressful, and maybe he should check how much his senses have changed before getting into a real fight. First, let's start with some sword practice, he says, moving his sword and positioning it in front of his body, realizing how fascinating this whole status system is. Just by adjusting some numbers, his physical abilities can change instantly. Yujun looks into the distance where it's not illuminated and sees a tall figure. I thought I lost them. Did one of them manage to follow me? Soon he starts stepping towards the creature quickly. Well, I've gotten a bit more used to this speed. Let's stretch a bit and get ready. The large creature roars loudly at Yujun. Chimera, a monster created by combining the bodies of various creatures with magical surgery. At first glance, it might look like an undead, but it's undoubtedly a living creature. When dealing with these creatures, quick and decisive action is the best option. His expression changes and he becomes completely serious, looking at the creature from below and moving towards the chimera, propelling himself off the ground and skillfully jumping, slicing the creature's arms with ease. All right, its flesh is surprisingly soft for an elite monster, making it easy to cut. He jumps back, landing with one knee on the ground and his sword embedded in the floor. Besides, I have a great speed advantage. My defense stat might be low, but that's okay as long as I don't get hit. Determined, he pushes off the ground, sinking it slightly, and jumps towards the creature again, shouting, "Let's finish this!" As he jumps towards the creature and moves his sword to strike. The chimera uses an arm on its head to punch Yujun, sending him crashing violently into a wall, causing a loud crash and leaving him disoriented, muttering that the creature is dangerous. That's why dealing with chimeras is so complicated. It has the exact abilities of the creatures it's composed of. Elastic arms? What kind of creature did they attach to this thing? The creature moves its elastic arm from its head towards Yujun again, who ducks to dodge. Damn! I just increased my stats, I can't just keep dodging forever. Seeing the creature's blows coming his way, he decides it's time to fight, and realizes he can't cut the elastic arm, which seems to be made of rubber due to its resilience. He remembers that the monsters appearing in hidden dungeons are obviously elite, meaning they are so strong that they should be lured out and hunted individually or in groups. I can't keep going like this. And it's not like this is the only enemy around here. I need to take it down before others show up. If I don't, it could get really dangerous, he thinks, frustrated that the alchemist should be busy making potions, not creating monsters. What a mess. He notices the arm coming his way. Wait, maybe it's time to use that technique? Just as the hand reaches inches from his belly, he leaps up, raising his sword, and falls back down, precisely striking the elastic arm. Got it. This is just my residual image. When the agility attribute is this high, this becomes possible. The severed part falls to the ground, spraying purple-colored blood. Okay, I cut off all 3 arms. You don't have any more hidden attacks, do you? The chimera backs into the cave wall with a frightened expression, and Yujun faces the creature with a smug smile, but soon sees the chimera's left arm regenerate and quickly come towards him, leaving him startled. Raising his sword to counter, he attacks the large hand that violently strikes the spot where Yujun was, smashing the ground with a malicious grin. Then it slowly lifts its hand, seeing the dust cloud that formed dissipate, revealing only the sunken ground from the impact, leaving it confused. Suddenly, the protagonist appears from above, spinning with his sword pointed at the creature, striking it on top of its head and slicing the chimera in half. You can't regenerate after being cut in half, can you? He says, questioning the now defeated monster. The system promptly notifies the player that he has defeated the alchemist's special chimera, level 1, and that he has leveled up. Once again, the system alerts him, this time informing him that he has reached the level to unlock the accessory slot. I leveled up twice at once. Hidden dungeons are really amazing for gaining experience. Reaching level 50 just 3 days after the tutorial is pretty quick compared to the characters I created in the past, but I don't have many accessories for low-level characters, do I? He opens his inventory and thinks about equipping some accessories. Should I equip the VIP4 ring that I kept as a premium item? And how about the rare bracelet and necklace set? He examines the information about each accessory, and, seeing that he has new gear, feels determined to face the game's challenges and shouts excitedly, "Huff! Huff! It's finally over! Damn chimeras! Their drop rates are horrible here, just like in the game." He takes out another healing potion and drinks it, recovering his health. Then, he carefully observes the chimera. At least I dealt with the monsters for now. By the way, what's this? The wall at the end looks suspicious. I checked, and it seems there's something behind it. He finds a short-haired blonde girl in an orange cape unconscious, with her wrists tied behind her back. Well, if she's not an NPC, she might be another player who discovered this dungeon first. But why would she be tied up in a hidden place like this? I can't help her without a clear understanding of the situation. Oh right, there's an item for that, isn't there? He opened his inventory and took out an item, retrieving a scroll. This option allows me to check the status of a target, but it can't be used if the target is too far away or of a higher level. It's a premium item that costs 5,001 each, but it's useful. He opened the scroll, which emitted a blue light, and directed the light towards the unconscious girl. Other players can't get this item anymore since the premium shop closed, but my inventory has enough stock. So Kim Hee-yeon, not an NPC but a player, and a Korean too. But wait, what's this? He checked the player's ratings and saw that she had an S ranking. With a rating like that, finding hidden dungeons would be very easy. With such a skill, she could easily find low-difficulty dungeons with great rewards. What a shame. I would love to farm low-risk, high-reward dungeons for easy gains without combat-related skills or traits. The protagonist murmured to himself as he noticed the girl slowly opening her eyes. Oh, she's waking up. Hey, are you awake? Can you hear me? The girl started to panic, widening her eyes and asking who he was, making Yoo-jun try to silence her so they wouldn't attract monsters. But please don't hurt me. I'm sorry for whatever I did, she pleaded desperately, tears in her eyes. No need to cry, just calm down. I just happened to find you while passing by, okay? The protagonist then wielded his sword, glancing at her, and asked what she thought she had done wrong while he stabbed his sword into the large rock. As you can see, I was trapped behind this stone wall. The details aren't important right now. She then softly asked him to untie her. Ah, nothing here, he said, and the girl questioned, what are you looking for? Yoo-jun replied that he was looking for a hidden item, as in places like this, they are usually concealed. He asked if she had found anything, and she replied that she hadn't found anything like that, and that this place was created by the person who trapped her, not part of the dungeon. He's a spirit conjurer. The stone wall appeared after he waved his staff, said the player. Yoo-jun then responded seriously, ah, he must have used an earth spirit. So why did he trap you here? The girl supposes it was to monopolize the dungeon's rewards and that there were 3 men. She looks down with a sad expression. The protagonist looks at her seriously and scratches his head with a finger, then says he understands her situation. Having low combat skills but an S-rank exploration skill, it's easy to guess how such a player survives. She probably sold dungeon locations and information to other players and then got caught by some unscrupulous ones. The Tower of Infinity is lawless, and many players engage in malicious activities. The strong make the rules. Given that they kept you alive, they probably plan to sell you as a slave or use you for more dungeon explorations, he says as the girl sheds tears. He thinks about how he would love to have Kim Hee-yeon's dungeon search skill, but finding the girl like this might be fate. Soon, he decides to befriend her, and people who have skills he lacks. After all, the goal of playing in a group is to help each other. Yoo-jun firmly holds the player's shoulders and looks into her face. Look up. It must have been hard being trapped in a place like this. I'm sorry for you. So, let me help you, he says, giving a smile with shining eyes and extending his right hand, thinking about the salesman's smile he is giving the girl. I'm really here to help. Look into my eyes. See how clear and bright they are. You can trust someone with eyes like these, he says, trying to be as convincing as possible. Yes, I guess I have to trust. I feel like something bad will happen if I don't. First, can you untie me? The girl asks, and he moves to her back, cutting the ropes that bind her wrists. He comments on how it must be great to find her savior in such a desperate situation, and the player thanks him gently. If you're really grateful, you'll repay this kindness, he says with a chuckle. She nervously responds that she will certainly repay him, and that she has a unique skill, but he quickly interrupts her, talking about her dungeon search skill. Confused, she asks how he knows this information. I would be very happy if you could share the locations of the dungeons you find. The higher the level, the better, Yoo-jun requests, still smiling. The girl agrees and asks again how he knows about her skill. He tells her not to worry about it, and that the reason he is helping her is because they are both Korean, so it's only right that they should stick together and help each other. Yes. It's good to be Korean, I guess. They finally manage to open a passage in the wall, and the player passes to the other side. The protagonist then decides to hear her side of the story about how she ended up in that place. I guess I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Kim Hee-yeon. I make a living exploring dungeons. Information about dungeons is very valuable, says Hee-yeon. Yoo-jun changes his expression to a more serious one, asking, did you get into trouble for selling dungeon locations to shady people? She points to a wall where there's a path right behind it and explains that the men who captured her were very meticulous. She heard that they followed her after learning about her reputation. Yoo-jun quickly uses his sword to break the wall, revealing a passage. So after I discovered this dungeon, they attacked me while I was exploring it. There were 3 of them. The girl gets angry, and he asks where they might be now. She replies that they went out to regroup and strategize before coming back to the dungeon. So, they are the ones who planted the chimeras at the entrance? It might be difficult for them to re-enter the dungeon, Yoo-jun asks seriously. The player explains that it won't be difficult because the chimeras in this dungeon freeze exactly at midnight and stay that way for about 2 hours. He questions in surprise, "Oh, really?" He recalls the War of the Gods and doesn't remember this mechanism existing during that time, thinking that this mechanism might be unique to this dungeon. They said they would come back in a few days, but I don't know how much time has passed since I was trapped. It was all dark in there, and I was drifting in and out of consciousness all the time, explains the girl. He then suggests that they clear the dungeon while the others are not here, as she knows the way and could handle the onslaught. The protagonist then reflects that he needs to be careful, as no matter how weak she may be, he can't afford to let his guard down. Being a novice in the Tower of Infinity, he decides to give her some useful items. Suddenly, a power comes toward the girl, missing her by a millimeter, as Yoo-jun grabs her by the hood of her clothes, pulling her to his side, saving her. Soon they hear an agitated voice. "We tied you up and even built a wall. How did you escape?" says the man among 2 more players. Another one continues. "Can't you count? That rookie must have rescued her." They explain that luckily they arrived early to prevent the 2 from escaping. So these are player killers. The protagonist positions himself in front of the girl, remembering that this is his first battle with other players and questioning whether he can really face something that isn't monsters. "All right, I've calmed down." One of the guys steps forward, scowling and glaring at the rookie. "Hey, don't try to play the hero. It's 3 against you. If you get yourself killed trying to be a hero, it's your own fault." Yoo-jun then seriously suggests that he drop the equipment and leave, observing their gear. It doesn't seem too difficult to deal with them, but the problem is that fighting people and monsters with a sword is different. What's there to discuss? Just kill him. The girl is useless anyway, says the man with the staff. And then the other opponent asks if he dares to draw a sword in his face, requesting his partner with the staff to buff him. The girl tries to help, but Yoo-jun thinks it's best for her to stay hidden so she doesn't get in the way. The 3 then approach, and one of them says they haven't needed to cut someone alive for a long time, but sometimes it ends up being necessary. "Hey, calm down, don't kill the girl," says the man with the staff. The girl takes cover in the hole they made to cross the wall, hoping Yoo-jun wins. Her opponent comes towards her with a big jump and raises his sword. Yoo-jun stares at him with determination. "Yes, if you hesitate and take a hit, that would be the worst way to be knocked out. If you're going to attack, don't hesitate." When his opponent moves to strike, the protagonist stops him with his sword, causing the impact to create an explosion of light from the force of the collision. Our protagonist then manages to interrupt the enemy's attack by placing his sword in front of his body so that the enemy's weapon doesn't hit him. Kyuk! How strong is this guy? He's tough as a brick wall. Yoo-jun then locks eyes with his opponent with a confident smile on his face, thinking about the level of guys who strut around from the 3rd floor. He sees no reason to prolong the fight, and in a swift motion moves his sword against the enemies, cutting both the sword and the man's head, leaving everyone who witnessed the scene confused. "Wait, Taewon was defeated in a single strike?" the man with the staff asks, adjusting his glasses, while another looks at the scene in disbelief. Yoo-jun then steps past the dead opponent on the ground and advances with his sword facing the other 2, who become desperate upon seeing that their partner, Ju Taewon, has just been defeated with a single blow. "Damn it! Attack if you don't want to die here!" the player with the staff shouts desperately. The protagonist stares them down seriously and recalls the earth magic, Lock. It's an instant spell with no casting time. While the mage casts the earth magic, trapping Yoo-jun's right foot, his partner raises his bow and aims, shooting in his direction. The arrow is fired quickly at him, but our protagonist turns his face and catches the arrow with his hand. How high is his agility level to catch arrows? Eventually he'll hit if I keep shooting. The opponent activates his triple shot ability and fires 3 arrows without pause from the first shot. Yoo-jun stares at the arrows and manages to clearly visualize them, blocking all 3 with his hands, leaving the other players shocked at his skills. The mage begins to spin his staff and casts a powerful magic. "I'm casting something very strong. Buy me some time," he says, while his partner raises his bow and arrow again, aiming at the protagonist and commenting that he has no choice but to use the expensive arrows he was saving up. Yujun watches closely and sees something descending from above, conjured by the mage, and wonders if that up there is magic. The entire place is hit, forming a cloud of smoke due to the impact. Are they dead? They just watched as I used my ultimate without being able to react. How pathetic, he continues, remarking on how arrogant the newcomer is. It was a waste to use Storm Shot, but if he sells the dead guy's equipment, he will gain more than he lost. He thinks he finally managed to avenge his dead friend. What an anticlimax, the girl says quietly as the two continue talking, and the man with the bow and arrow brags about his skill to Jong-hoon, the mage. Anyway, why do mages take so long to cast spells? Just use light magic like a lantern or something. It takes an eternity to explode. The mage grumbles and soon looks at the dust smoke his partner formed with the attack, seeing something and asking what it would be, but then they hear a cough and someone emerges from the smoke. Our protagonist appears coughing, with a hand on his mouth, narrowing his eyes at the other players and thinking about the opponent's Storm Shot. He didn't expect to use this ability in such a narrow place, and if he hadn't reacted, he would have been hit, but it wouldn't have been enough to kill him. Huh, what? He was within range of Storm Shot and dodged? How is that possible? Seeing him, the player opens a big smile, calling his name, happy to see him alive. Yujun takes a combat position while focusing on the enemy. If it's a skill used by a level 50 archer, it must be Storm Shot. I know the range of Storm Shot. There's no way I'd fall for such an obvious move. So let's finish this. The archer player notices a wall where his partner should be, and shocked, stares at the barrier, wondering what that would be. He hears his mage partner shout to do something, leaving him furious for having built the barrier and left him alone against the protagonist. Your judgment is good, but your skills are not. Should I eliminate the archer first? Says the protagonist, staring at him seriously, while the archer opponent desperately shouts to be saved. A blow is struck, blood spurting from the opponent. Meanwhile, the mage runs desperately through the cave. It was a good thing to have planned my escape in advance. It hasn't been looking good since Tank Taewon died with a single blow. The man continues to wonder what a monster like that is doing on the 3rd floor, and thinks maybe he should report this dungeon to the guild and not deal with it alone. Suddenly he feels a blow to his face, making his glasses fall. He's already here? Says the mage, frightened. The protagonist has caught up and is now prepared to attack the mage. Impressive. To think this mage, dressed in celestial attire, managed to survive my attack. I doubt this is the result of a skill. It's probably the equipment. Yujun crouches with his sword on his shoulder, and the mage, raising his hands, considers surrendering, realizing it's futile to fight the monster alone. Wait, I understand you're angry, but I'm a conservationist. Let's resolve this peacefully with words. The mage initiates dialogue, but Yujun looks at him, questioning the point of talking now. The mage then tries a friendly tone. Listen, I'm from the Golden Lion Guild. I can introduce you if you want to join the guild. With power like yours, the higher-ups will even assist you. On the other hand, what if the guild retaliates against me if I die? Let's not complicate things and negotiate instead. The protagonist, with a slight smile as he walks, asks the mage to confirm that there will be no witnesses, crushing the mage's glasses while the enemy becomes confused and breaks out in a cold sweat, while Yujun stares at him with a disturbing smile and his eyes gleam like a red beam. Mage, observing, then wonders if there really is no way out, other than fighting. Wait, we're not alone. The guild leader will be here soon. Seriously, there's no need to continue this, right? Let's calm down and end this here. The mage says, trying to hide his nervousness, and then continues saying, Senior, over here, please. When the protagonist looks back wondering what it could be, the sneaky mage shouts, Die with this! He then raises his staff in front of him and casts something in his direction. He tries to attack our protagonist with full force, but he emerges unscathed. He then closely examines the staff the man is holding. As expected, it's defensive equipment. The protection ring blocks a single blow. It's useful for classes with low maximum life as a precaution. The mage uses the staff to cast spells again. A light emanates from it as he lets out an angry scream, activating the stone barrier skill. This stone barrier can't withstand my sword, Yujun says, swiftly moving his sword against the stone barrier, causing it to collapse on him. In the end, I killed them all. I knew one day I would have blood on my hands, but the protagonist turns his back on the fallen opponents and begins to walk away to distance himself from there. At the bottom of a cave, we see the wreckage over 2 bodies of the enemies that Yujun had defeated. I can't believe it. He defeated all 3 of them in an instant, says Kim Hee-yeon, the player hired by Yujun, kneeling on the dungeon floor. Observing what had just happened, she continues, They were not just ordinary players, they were notorious and merciless assassins, but he made it look easy. As she watches how Yoo-jun was able to defeat them calmly, she thinks about the unusual equipment that was able to cut both weapon and flesh of the opponent with just one strike. Why would someone with this ability still be at the lower levels? Come to think of it, I'm really lucky. Hyeon thought she would be dead, but now she has met someone so strong and kind. She considers the incident a miracle as she sees Yoo-jun in the passage they had opened in the wall, approaching her and observing his sword, which shone like the luminous blue sphere. You were amazing. Knocking down guild members so easily, even if they are just low-level grunts, is no small feat, she says, clasping her hands and looking at Yoo-jun with admiration. It's nothing, really. Yoo-jun responds with a gentle smile, crouching down to pick up the bow on the ground. He then turns to her and asks if there was anyone else with the three men. She replies that it was just them, but they might have contacted their guild for reinforcements. They were from the Golden Lion Guild, right? They probably didn't report to their superiors. If they can keep a dungeon hidden, why would they share it with anyone else? The protagonist agrees, mentioning that he has encountered such players at the beginning of his journey. He tells her that he understands the situation and feels a bit downcast. Yoo-jun then extends the bow and the mage's staff that they had just faced, offering the two weapons to Hyeon, reminding her that he sells information about the dungeons and that these weapons could help her. There's really no need, she responds, raising her hands in refusal of the weapons, thinking that it would be great if someone like him invited her to his group. I wonder if he will invite me. Yoo-jun then insists on handing over the weapons. Consider this as compensation for what those guys did to you. The player insists that there is no need and thinks he doesn't have to go so far, as she is the one who should reward him for saving her life. These items really aren't a big deal. Just help me find some dungeons if you really want to reward me. The protagonist remembers that he cannot miss the opportunity to appear generous in the eyes of someone with a rare skill. He asks only that the player accept the offered weapons. I'll accept them then, Hyeon says softly, bringing her hands to the weapons and taking them for herself while thinking, he's a good person. I'll definitely help him explore the dungeons if he wants. The player guides the protagonist back to the passage they had opened before facing the enemies, indicating a path. If you go this way, you'll reach the boss room. I had to turn back because of the chimeras. Yoo-jun, hearing this, says that she won't have to worry about the chimeras, as he can handle them. He observes as she speaks, amazed at how talented she is to have found the boss room so quickly. Be careful when dealing with the items, you might be tracked, Hyeon says, warning him as they follow the indicated path. Yoo-jun says she doesn't need to worry, as he has reliable contacts for that. The player makes an angry expression, thinking how pathetic her attempt to refuse the weapons was, and that from now on he needs to act correctly. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks about how valuable she is for having a talent like this that will lead the assault on the dungeons in the future. He knows she cannot be captured by guilds when making trades. Is this the boss room? Yoo-jun says, smiling as they approach a large iron door. He holds his sword, resting it on his shoulder. Do you know what kind of boss is in there? She looks at the door and then at Yoo-jun, replying, No, I don't. Even with my ability, I can't get information about the boss room. The protagonist soon approaches the door, saying, Looks like we'll have to face it head on then. He brings his hand, sliding it along the large door and pushing it open. Let's go. They then enter the hall, illuminated by several stone torches lined up. The game system warns that the ancient alchemist Paranet, who sought to become a Death Knight, has awakened from his slumber. Yoo-jun looks seriously at the back of the large hall, where the man whose body is just bones, dressed in a yellow cape and hood, and holding a red and black sword, is sitting on a throne. Ho ho, it's been a long time since I've seen a living person, says the skeleton, removing his hood as he looks at the players. Yoo-jun brings his hand near his throat, grabs the front of his hood and frowns. You startled me. Level 68? I can handle that. If it's an incomplete one, well, he says, staring at the creature, and asks the girl to wait outside, saying he'll take care of it. The player just nods, looking at the skull with suspicion. A knight who lived a noble life and was resurrected by a high-level lich becomes the terror known as the Death Knight. But this was an alchemist when he was alive, and it is natural that he is incomplete, since he was not a knight who was reborn as a Death Knight. A mortal dares to approach a Death Knight without fear, says the skeleton, standing up and leaning his large sword on the ground as he stares at the protagonist. What arrogance of an inexperienced knight. Let's see if you live up to the reputation of a Death Knight. Yoo-jun responds to the Death Knight's speech with a determined look as he walks towards the creature, getting closer and closer. The knight calls him a fool and warns that he should value his life, for if he continues to confront him, there will be no return. The protagonist then tells him to stop talking nonsense and for the knight to come to him. "Nonsense! How dare you speak to me like that?" the Death Knight asks, incredulous. Yujun then notices the change in his opponent and sees an opening. Without delay, he rushes towards the enemy, moving his sword to strike him. "What? He dodged my attack even though it was perfectly aimed at an unprotected area? Let me try again." Our protagonist moves his sword towards the knight again, trying to hit him, but once again the knight evades. Yujun continues his movements until he manages to hit him. As soon as he finds another opening, he moves his sword again, finally succeeding, but only cutting his sword in half. He insists, trying to hit the knight several times, but fails in all attempts. Ha, what's with this guy? How can something dodge everything so clumsily? Is it a skill? Yujun thinks, trying to understand how the knight can get out of the blows so easily. "It seems you're already tired. Did you really think such weak blows would work on a Death Knight?" says the knight, staring at the protagonist with a deadly gaze. Yujun, analyzing, concludes that the opponent's abilities are clearly inferior to his, but he is able to dodge the blows so easily because of a precognitive ability that allows him to predict the movements. Yes, even bosses have their tricks, huh? So how do I destroy that annoying skull of his? The Death Knight feels Yujun's murderous intent and realizes that the protagonist is capable of identifying this survival instinct, or perhaps a danger-sensing ability. "Foolish mortal! I can see through your attacks. Don't provoke me further. If you leave now, I'll spare your life," says the knight, extending his hand and almost pointing at Yujun. Yujun thanks the offer, but refuses to leave, saying he knows what ability the knight has and will figure out how to defeat him. "Let's see if you can dodge this." He starts approaching the opponent again, who gets nervous and tells him not to come closer, warning that his life is in danger. Pretend to be afraid, then reveal a secret attack, a barrage of poisonous potions. "Die," says the knight, seeing Yujun approach quickly. He realizes that the knight is throwing potions in his direction while preparing to attack and thinks, "I think I figured out his ability. By the way, can poisonous potions really melt the floor?" He wasn't joking about the deadly poison. Yujun tries to understand why an alchemist who can do these things would try to become a Death Knight, thinking he would be much stronger if he followed a single path. The protagonist covers his nose with his clothes because of the strong smell of poison. Ha, how will you avoid the deadly poison that disperses through the air? Even breathing will kill you. Even a powerful warrior will die the same way, victim of the poison, says the knight, agitated. The system issues an alert to Shin Yujun. You are now affected by a status effect. You have been poisoned by Paranet's poison. You are affected by a special status effect. The knight then says that this poison was his secret weapon that defeated countless enemies, even when he was alive. Yujun notices his health dropping rapidly, and although the enemy is incomplete, he is still a boss. Without thinking of giving up, Yujun opens his inventory and grabs a beginner's potion, intended only for low-level players. I have a bunch of these premium tutorial items for new players. There's no way an antidote can cure this. My poison is triple strength. Regular antidotes can't cleanse this. This is a divine potion from the game developers that can't be found in the real world. No poison stands a chance against it. He soon turns the bottle, drinking the potion, and the system warns that the status effect has been removed. Determined to finish what he started, he gets up. The knight realizes that his ability has been discovered and questions Yujun, who replies that warning-type abilities are not activated if the attack is out of sight. Meanwhile, Yujun pierces the knight's skull with his sword. No! The opponent tries to react, but it was too late. After plunging his sword into the knight's skull, Yujun pulls it up, cutting the skull and finally defeating the Death Knight. As soon as he defeats his opponent, the system automatically issues the message, "You have defeated the incomplete Death Knight, Paranet." In addition to warning that he leveled up and discovered the alchemist's laboratory, the system mentions other achievements, including obtaining Paranet's essence and Paranet's life vessel. By injecting the essence into the life vessel, you can summon the incomplete Death Knight Paranet. The system ends its messages, and Yujun analyzes his achievements. This is an excellent reward for a hidden dungeon boss. And what's this? A boss-level summon that has an extremely low disappearance rate? Incredible. At the very moment the protagonist defeated the Death Knight, Hee-yeon quickly entered the hall, shouting excitedly, "Yujun, you did it!" She approaches him as he is opening his inventory to summon the knight he just defeated. "Wow, defeating the dungeon boss alone? How is that possible?" the player asks. Yoo-jun then replies saying that it was only because this boss was surprisingly weak, so he was able to win. Pointing to the gate, he says that the most important thing is that he has already opened it and that they should hurry to get out and rest. Ah, we should, but oops, before we leave, can I add you as a friend? After all, I believe it was fate that brought us here, the girl asks, who becomes extremely happy to hear that and immediately accepts, saying that her ID is the same as her name. The system has a standard messaging function, which serves as a substitute for cell phones in the Tower of Infinity, where electronics do not exist. Yoo-jun tells her not to be sad that they have to separate, and that if he receives a message from her saying she has found a hidden dungeon, he will rush there immediately. But for now, there is a more urgent problem that needs to be solved. Back at the inn where he managed to get food and now a room, Yoo-jun is sitting on his bed cross-legged, looking seriously at the achievements he obtained after defeating the Death Knight, including the life capsule and Paranet's essence. I wonder why an incomplete Death Knight like him possessed his life capsule when it should be in the hands of a lich. This can be used to summon him. Should I use it now, or should I put it up for auction? He ponders and soon comes to a decision. Picking up the bottle of Paranet's essence, he carefully pours it over the life capsule. As Yoo-jun does this, the essence forms a purple smoke and begins to create a heart and soon a skeleton body, which is that of the Death Knight. As soon as the body finishes materializing, the system emits messages. The incomplete Death Knight Paranet has become a pet. A growth-type pet has been bound to you. Yoo-jun looks and confirms that it is indeed a growth-type pet, an extremely valuable type of pet, as it can never be obtained with money due to its extremely low appearance rate in stores. Unlike regular pets with fixed levels, growth-type pets can play the role of more than one team member and can be summoned indefinitely without a time limit. He watches as the knight kneels on one knee on the bed. But first, Yoo-jun thinks, moving his foot to kick, throwing the knight off the bed. Hey, stop making strange noises and get off the bed. You're Paranet, right? Do you remember anything from the dungeon? The creature looks confused at the protagonist, who remembers having killed him in the dungeon. The knight responds, getting up agitated. No way! I have finally overcome death and evolved into a true Death Knight. By the way, let me show you the true power of a Death Knight to celebrate my evolution. Observing his actions, Yoo-jun realizes that the knight seems to have retained the memory of before his death and his eccentric personality. But first, where the hell are we? The knight asks, and Yoo-jun looks at him with a gentle expression, asking him to sit down. The system issues an alert to the knight, informing him that if he disobeys his owner's orders, he will disappear forever. Wow, the Death Knight says in a low tone, sitting cross-legged in front of Yoo-jun, whispering in disbelief. Well, the command worked. Do you know what's going on? Yoo-jun asks, looking down from the bed with a serious face. The creature, with a skeleton body, replies, I heard an unknown voice in my head. I'm a pet. Yoo-jun asks if he has anything else to say, and the knight apologizes for acting arrogantly in the dungeon, offering sincere apologies. What nonsense are you babbling? It's okay, but why do you act so arrogant? Yoo-jun asks. The knight responds that he acts that way because he is a bit cowardly, and acting arrogant serves to hide his weakness. He joins his index fingers, seeming a little embarrassed to say this. Also, you annihilated all my chimeras, so I tried to scare you by acting haughty, the knight says, remembering how frightening Yoo-jun was in the dungeon. Our protagonist then asks if he was just pretending to be strong, and his answer is yes. Yoo-jun thinks how ridiculous it is that a Death Knight, who relies on melee combat, is cowardly. Let me check your stats now, he says to the knight as he opens his inventory. The skills are as expected: survival instinct, evasion, and poison alchemy. Is it acceptable for a Death Knight to be like this? He then notices something in his inventory. Yoo-jun was sure he had an item to increase the level of pets. He looks and finds a potion, a pet level booster that can be used on pets below level 100, and also the Blessings of the Dead legendary tier item, which maximizes the potential of undead-type monsters. Yoo-jun obtained the pet level booster by recharging during a certain event period and never expected to use it like this. As for the Blessings of the Dead, although not a cash item, it is extremely rare and effective. He grabs the items and gets up from the bed, approaching as the Death Knight shrinks in fear. What is that? I have a bad feeling about the ominous aura being released, says the knight, causing Yoo-jun to look at the item and comment on how terrible he is at evaluating items. Yoo-jun questions whether the knight has any idea how valuable that is, and the creature asks if it's not cursed because of its frightening aura. Yoo-jun replies that the skeleton's face is much more ominous, and with a bored expression, tells him to stop the chatter and throws the items in his direction, telling him to take them. Can I really consume this? the knight asks insistently, and Yujun tells him to stop being annoying and just drink the potion, asking if he really thinks he would give something dangerous to his pet. The knight resolves to tilt the bottle into his mouth, while Yujun watches with an excited smile and his eyes glowing red. The system then issues an alert, warning that the pet, Paranet, has reached level 100, leaving the pet excited by such a rapid advancement. "I can feel my power increasing. I feel much stronger, maybe even twice as strong," says the Death Knight, clenching his fists and feeling his power grow. Without delay, Yujun grabs the Blessings of the Dead item and sticks it on the Death Knight's forehead, startling him. "Great, that worked. Now it's this one's turn," says the protagonist. Frightened, the skeleton looks at the item on his forehead, which begins to glow intensely, causing Yujun to cover his eyes due to the light filling the entire room. The potential of the pet Paranet has increased significantly. The system issues the warning. "Look, Master, my true potential has been unlocked." The Death Knight changes part of his appearance, his salmon pink hair turning golden, and now there are yellow rays radiating from his body. Yujun opens his inventory to see the data of his pet and holds his chin thoughtfully as he analyzes. Well, using the valuable items was worth it. With the body explosion ability, although it's a good ability, it seems to be moving away from being a Death Knight. Paranet's magical power statistic is also high, so that should be useful, and he seems pleased as well. The protagonist thinks, observing the actions of his pet, while the latter enjoys the increase in power and still radiating a bit of golden rays, runs his hand through his hair and feels powerful, saying, "From now on, please call me Paranet, the chosen one." Yujun sees how useful Paranet has become and feels more confident about ascending to the next floor. Back at the tower, players are in a camp near the entrance to the 5th floor of the Unity Tower. Many are stuck there, unable to advance to the next floor. "We need a tank. We have 3 in our group. We'll set out as soon as we have a tank to complete the 4th. A player with purple clothes, red charms, and a witch's hat yells at another, who is a little ahead of Yujun, who is leaning against a tree. A player in yellow armor and helmet next to the girl looks around for a tank. "We're looking for a reliable tank. We'll pay in advance." The ninja-designed player in front of Yujun responds to the girl. "These people are looking for tanks due to the specialty of the 5th floor, the boss raid. The 5th floor boss has no weaknesses, so it is purely a test of the group's tank, DPS, and healer potential. This is a challenge that can be considered a wall of tears for players below level 100. Well, even I can't do this alone. Paranet's abilities have become quite useful, but the 5th floor boss, Ram, requires 4 group members," the protagonist thinks, smiling as he observes the conversation between the players. As Paranet's various abilities are one thing, but his cowardly personality is the real problem. It would be a good opportunity for Yujun to observe the abilities of the common players this time, as, observing the situation, the difference between the game and reality becomes apparent. It is particularly challenging to find a reliable tank around there, a role that was widely considered noble. Healers were also precious in the game, while long-range fighters like mages and archers were safer than tanks. So it's better to use what's closest to death as a tank, Yujun thinks, observing the camp while waiting to find a tank to help on the next level. A gray-haired man wearing a black and red cloak and a white-haired player wearing an all-white cloak were sitting on separate crates, talking to another player standing in front of them. "Ha! This is a total disaster. All we need is one more tank," says the man in the black and red cloak to the other two. The girl adds, "There's a shortage of tanks. So many teams are opting for evasion tanks." The man standing in front of the two responds, "Then we'll be annihilated. We definitely need someone to face the boss on the 5th floor." Our protagonist arrives asking for permission to join the group, and one of them asks who he is. "I heard you say you were going to leave as soon as a tank arrived," Yujun says to the player in black and red. He quickly approaches, holding Yujun's hands with sparkling eyes of excitement. "Oh, are you a tank? Tank! If you trust me, I'll reward you with a comfortable trip to the boss room with my great healing skills. My heals are not like the common ones. You won't get hurt," the man says, extremely agitated and excited. Yujun explains that he is not actually a tank and asks for a minute to explain. He says he is not really a tank, but just mentioned it to match their expectations. The man walks away without a second thought, taking the other two players with him, and tells Yujun to get out of there if he's not the tank. "We don't have time to deal with traveling merchants," he says, walking away impatiently. "Looks like we're screwed again today. Let's just wander the nearby field and pick up items," says the other man, who has arrows stored on his back. Yujun, reflecting on being compared to a traveling merchant, calls the group again, asking for a minute. He explains that although he is not a tank, he can fulfill the role. This makes the man who ignored him look serious as Yujun begins to show something. A summoning circle appears on the ground with smoke swirling, startling the others there. Hey, why did you suddenly use magic and disappear from the camp? Do you want to fight? Wait a moment, that's a summoning circle, a pet summoning circle. Finally, Paranet is summoned, appearing as a fully red armor with a black cape. He clears his throat. Ahem, here comes the Death Knight, Paranet, he says as he is summoned. The man questions if this summoning will be the tank. Although he has never seen such a summoning, its size seems suitable. Of course, I've never heard of using a summoning as a tank, but, says the white-haired player, while her partner looks with wide eyes. The protagonist appears from behind the summoning and apologizes for summoning it suddenly, explaining that he was afraid they would leave. He shows how Paranet has great defense, very high for his level, as he is a skeleton type and, unlike humans, does not feel pain, able to receive blows continuously. In addition, if in danger, he can be called back and flee. I can call him back and resummon him, can I? Yujun asks Paranet, giving a light punch to his armored belly. Paranet responds, well, it's a bit. The white-haired player, now next to Yujun, says that the summoning seems good. The black and red-clad man, skeptical, questions whether a pet can face the boss on the 5th floor. Why are you worried? Even if the pet's skills are a little weak, if the owner deals damage, it will be like having the power of 5 people. She says, trying to convince him. He insists, replying, hey, being a tank is such an important position. If a mistake is made, the entire group can be defeated. Our protagonist tries to calm them down, saying not to worry. He assures that the pet has sturdy equipment and good defense. Although its ability to maintain aggression is a bit weak, its attack and defense power are greater than that of a warrior of the same level. In that case, what is your level? If there is a big difference between us, the man says, earning a look from Paranet, who finds him too demanding. The player with arrows on his back arrives, slapping the man on the head and telling him to end the discussion and stop bothering the boy. The player in the black and red cloak warns that he bit his tongue after receiving the slap on the head, while his irritated partner questions if he is by any chance conducting a job interview. Don't you want to go to the next floor? He asks angrily at his partner. The girl approaches Yujin again, apologizing for her friend, and says that he is an exceptional leader. She introduces herself, informing that her name is Ji Suyan. I specialize in healing and buffs, and I can temporarily resurrect someone with a shield, she finishes speaking. Soon the group leader introduces himself, moving his hand and making a flame come out of the tip of his finger. I am Kim Hyunsu, the group leader. My specialty is fire magic. I tend to be critical of people to compensate for what my group members lack, so I hope you don't take offense. Without waiting, the player with arrows on his back introduces himself as Park Hyunwoo. As he can see, he is an archer and has a skill called Rain of Arrows, which can cause a lot of damage. I'm Shin Yujun, a short-range DPS. Nice to meet you. Hyunsu looks over Yujun's shoulder, telling him to get ready as they will wait there. The protagonist says there is no need as he is already well prepared. Is that so, then? Says the leader, calling them towards the portal of the 5th floor. We can discuss the rest on the way. They soon cross the portal with the leader in front, followed by Yujun next to Paranet and the healer right behind. Yujun, have you already tried to challenge the 5th floor trial dungeon? The leader asks, looking at him. No, but I'm familiar with the strategy, Yujun replies. Hyunsu starts to consider him an experienced player and decides to skip the instructions, proceeding with caution. The leader warns that if the tank's skills are insufficient, or if his damage is pathetically low, they will immediately remove him and disband the group, and asks if he is okay with that. Why do you doubt my abilities so much? Paranet asks, poking Yujun's shoulder, who responds to the leader by agreeing and giving a smile, showing that it's fine if that's the decision. You expect me to be the tank? Are you serious? Paranet asks Yujun, who questions if he lacks confidence, and he denies it, leaving a doubt in the air. Hey, I didn't tell them, but you're already level 100. You're at the same level as the boss of this floor. With your level, you're invincible with that armor. Yujun tells only Paranet to hear, and then says his concern is drawing attention and getting the group defeated. Why do you pretend to be weak when you're always boasting about being a super undead? By the way, Paranet, what weapon are you most proficient with? Yujun asks while looking at his inventory. He then replies that as a knight, his best weapon is naturally the sword. His master tells him not to show off and answer honestly, so he admits to being proficient with all weapons but best with the sword. Okay, even if your weapon proficiency is low, your stats are overwhelming, so go all out. Right. Paranet gets excited about the black-based sword with red details, holding it and admiring it, as Yujun explains that this is a sword with medium to high attack power and a chance to cause bleeding. This can help in an aggressive confrontation. It's a legendary grade weapon, so if you break it, it's over. Wow, a legendary grade weapon. Paranet looks enchanted at the sword. You seem to improve so easily, says Yujun with a bored expression, watching the knight admire the item. Yujun, you're rich, aren't you? It's a legendary grade weapon, so it must be very expensive, and you're using it on your pet. Moreover, it doesn't even seem to be an item that can be obtained on the lower floors, the girl questions, drawing Yujun's attention, who looks at her with a nervous smile as she looks at him suspiciously. I know a popular ranker who helped me a little, but he asked me to keep it a secret, says the protagonist, but she insists that he tell her. Yujun manages to divert, apologizing for not being able to tell, as the player really hates it when he tells people his name. He's just so grumpy. She then says that Yujun's inventory is probably full of valuable items, and agrees that she doesn't need to know about the alleged player who gave him the sword. Enough chit-chat! Look, the patrol is coming! The leader finally spots two creatures with armor helmets, each with a sword. Let's get through the monsters quickly! Yujun, use your pet to draw the aggro. Yujun, smiling and seeming excited, prepares and orders Paranet to advance on the enemies. He obeys, advancing and attacking with his sword. Almost at the same moment, the leader uses his fire magic, creating a fiery explosion. Yujun, this pet is no more suitable as a DPS than a tank. Its attack power is no joke. He acknowledges that Yujun's summon is really strong. Let me fry those little ones, says Paranet, excited about the small fight. The protagonist observes, seeing that he had also underestimated his pet, as it is doing much better than expected. First, draw the aggro from the front, and each DPS should take care of an enemy. Let's reduce their numbers quickly, thinks the protagonist, observing the skeleton. You guys deal with those on the left, I'll attack on the right, Hyunsu shouts, as two more goblins come towards him along with a wolf. The archer prepares, firing an explosive arrow in the direction of one of the creatures, which is hit and violently thrown. Other creatures are struck by Paranet and Yujun, who manage to defeat them all quickly, leaving the place full of bodies on the ground. Okay, we've taken care of all the little fish without suffering any losses. Now finally, it's the boss room we've been waiting for, the leader says, wasting no time, walking towards where the 5th floor boss is. Arriving there, they find a sleeping child on the floor of the large hall. The 5th floor boss, the troll, the leader says. The protagonist observes the creature from below. This creature may be a common monster in other games, but here it is different. This monster, known as a threat to low-level players trying to progress, has incredible defense and attack power. It also has a powerful regeneration ability. It is violent and agile, making it difficult to retreat or survive, so having a tank that can hold the aggro is essential. Although it is relatively weak against fire, it is nothing unique for this monster. Ha, is this weak enemy my final opponent? I think I can handle it alone, but, Paranet says, letting his ego dominate again as he leans his sword on the ground. Wow, hey, your ego has gotten too big even if you're on a roll, says Yujun, observing right behind him and preparing for the fight. Finally finding the 5th floor boss, Paranet doesn't waste time and soon starts walking towards it. Is this troll my opponent? Yujun, seeing that Paranet has started to advance towards the troll, widens his eyes in surprise, telling him not to go all out against the opponent without a plan. The system then warns that the 5th floor boss challenge raid has begun. Damn, it started, says the protagonist, still surprised. And the leader Hyunsu asks if they should retreat and restart if the tank is unstable. There's no need. The tank is good, but, the protagonist says, smiling, as Paranet raises his sword pointing it at his opponent. Look at this great barbaric creature. I, Super Paranet, will take care of him. Suddenly, Paranet looks stunned at the troll boss as it moves its weapon towards him and strikes the ground, causing a loud thud and breaking part of the floor. As soon as he manages to escape the troll's blow, he tries to hide behind Yujun. Master, I think we need to change our strategy, he says, startling the rest of the group, who ask when he got there. He continues, saying that it's not shameful to retreat when facing a strong enemy, and pleads for them to accept his suggestion. The survival instinct skill has brought him back to reality. Yujun thinks this may be the side effect of instinctively detecting danger. Hey, a dead guy is scared? Even if you die, you'll be resurrected. Give me time to prepare. With this equipment, you won't die, even if you're hit. Yujun pushes his pet back into the fight and shouts, Don't retreat! That's an order! Paranet goes back near the troll and shrinks back, seeing it approach. So that's where you were hiding! Your thick skull! The troll says, getting angry and trying to hit him again. Paranet crouches, avoiding the blow, and tries to reason with the beast, but only manages to make it angrier, causing it to move faster and try to hit him violently. Sorry about that. He's a bit of a coward despite his abilities, the protagonist says to the leader as they watch the fight. Hyunsoo responds that he was a bit surprised and asks if it will be okay. Yoojun says they'll soon see that, despite his personality, his skills are decent. The boss troll's attacks are becoming increasingly intense, making it harder for Paranet to escape. He's dodging the boss's attacks by a hair, says the leader, surprised by the tank's movements, and the player notes Paranet's skill, saying he seems to be reading the opponent's attacks. This is what I'm talking about. He has an S-rank survival instinct ability, but he's afraid of a 5th floor boss. If it weren't for his cowardly personality, he could do so much more. Paranet finally moves his sword, managing to hit the troll and drawing a little blood with the blow to its neck. Yoojun feels a little frustrated that the knight's blows are always so superficial. He should dedicate himself more. He can't understand how Paranet is afraid and can't inflict a deeper wound. With the troll's regenerative power, superficial injuries will heal quickly. It may take longer than expected to attract the aggro. Then suddenly, a lot of smoke appears, putting the group on alert. Let's go. It looks like the aggro has been attracted, so let's start, says the player. The archer follows in the direction of the enemy, determined to finally cause some serious damage. Yoojun then shouts for them to wait. As it's still too early to go after the boss, the leader questions what the problem is, saying he timed everything and it's definitely all set. Don't you know the 5-minute aggro rule? That's common knowledge in raids. Our protagonist turns to Hyunsoo, saying that's ridiculous, and that raid strategies should be flexible depending on the group composition. This isn't a driver's license test. Are you just going to memorize and regurgitate answers? Suddenly, the troll lets out a loud roar of pain, and the archer interrupts Yoojun and Hyunsoo's discussion, calling their leader to see the critical hit that hit the creature's eye. Even though the troll has great regenerative power, its eyes regenerate slowly. The human who inflicted this pain, I won't forgive you, says the troll to the archer, activating his sense of danger. The protagonist sees this and warns that the aggro has fallen from the tank. The group leader looks surprised and awestruck. What the hell? I didn't follow the 5-minute rule. The player activates her shield just as her archer friend is hit head-on by the troll, being violently thrown against the wall. Human, I'll kill you! The boss yells furiously, running towards the player who realizes, leaning against the wall, that his health has been drastically reduced and is now at half. Her healing friend activates her healing ability, increasing the friend's health. Good healing job. As soon as the skeleton pet reestablishes the aggro, we'll try again. Let's retreat for now, regroup, and then try again. When the archer's life is restored, the troll notices the change and begins to search for who is helping and healing the archer. Hyunsoo glances at the player next to him, who helped the archer. No, attracting aggro just with healing, it's too late, he says, seeing the troll extend his hand in the direction of the girl, quickly reaching within centimeters of grabbing her. The boss then strikes where the player is, leaving the place destroyed. Before she was reached, Yoojun skillfully grabs her and takes her to the other side. Yoojun, you're amazing, says the group leader with admiration, while Paranet is left in awe. Oh, as expected of my master. The protagonist then orders the Death Knight to protect the healer, and Paranet accepts the order. We've come this far, we can't just start over, Yoojun says, putting Suyeon on the ground and walking towards the floor boss. The girl questions him, mentioning that her leader said to regroup. Our protagonist changes his expression to a more serious one and says that, in fact, they can't, because this opponent regenerates very quickly, and he hopes to complete the raid today and leave today, even if it seems impossible. Don't just stand there, attack! The great troll roars and delivers several blows to Yoojun, who skillfully dodges them all. This is much more manageable than expected, the leader then shouts, saying that's ridiculous, and asks if Yoojun deflected the boss's attack with his sword. Hyunsoo asks if it's an ability or perhaps a characteristic. Wait, is Yoojun holding up? The archer asks. The furious boss warns that Yoojun is in the way, and he replies that he wants to kill the annoying ones first. What, how is that thing jumping over my head? Yoojun asks, seeing the troll appear above, coming towards him. Get out of the way, Skull, I'm after the little girl. The troll walks towards Paranet and Suyeon. If the healer falls, it's definitely over. Forget the aggro, just attack, the leader says, waving a wand and igniting a light at its tip. Enraging the boss, he wants to kill him with just one blow, but before the great troll could do anything, a noise catches everyone's attention. When they see what happened, they are shocked. The head of the great 5th floor boss rolls on the ground. What? But what the hell? This is ridiculous. The boss? He cut the boss's head off with a single blow? The entire group says, looking awestruck. Yoojun then falls in front of the troll, observing him with his sword in hand. He knows he could face him even if the requirement wasn't to form a team. he could defeat him alone. But honestly, I didn't expect it to be so easy. But we've cleared the 5th floor anyway, the protagonist says, and soon they start receiving more system warnings. The 5th floor boss, the troll, has been defeated, the 5th floor trial has been cleared, and the next floor is open. Yujun and the others level up. Yujun and his partners are in a kind of camp already at the next level. Ji Suyan thanks the protagonist, saying that she thought it was all over for her, but that she survived thanks to Yujun. I will never forget this favor. Yujun receives the thanks by emphasizing that they all work together on this. But Hyun-soo contradicts him. Hey, even if your mouth is crooked, you have to speak right. To be honest, Yujun did it all alone. The player then asks if she can add him to send messages, and Yujun accepts without hesitation. The archer says that if something good happens or if he finds a decent opportunity, he will surely get in touch. They then say goodbye, and our protagonist gradually walks away. Wow, now that I think about it, he's just impressive walking. I thought he was a strange guy walking alone without group members, but he's really very skilled. By the way, we were overloaded today. The group's archer agrees and thinks it would have been better to have continued as a group instead of separating like this. Nah, the difference in skill was too great to work together. With skills that allow you to take down bosses with a single blow, he can go alone, their leader says, still watching Yujun from afar. The archer asks about having exchanged contacts, and Hyun-soo says it shouldn't have been that way, and that they should strive to improve their skills so they won't be ashamed again. Should we go back to the dungeon then? His partner asks. I agree, but let's eat first. We can't skip meals when we're trying to survive, right? Over time, the 9th floor trial takes place, and Yujun faces another creature, this time a giant scorpion. Several stones fly with a great impact, and our protagonist climbs onto one of them, wielding his sword and skillfully moving to cut his opponent in half. Soon after cutting it, he heads towards the ground, falling, but manages to land safely. He advanced quickly from the 5th to the 9th floor after breaking through, but he's starting to feel a bit overwhelmed now that he's so advanced. Did I overdo it in the end? You defeated the boss of the 9th floor trial, the Desert Scorpion. You have completed the 9th floor trial. The next floor is now open. The system also warns that he has obtained the rare title of Experienced Climber. Experienced Climber. As expected, I did it, obtaining this title even as an F2P player. He says, looking at his achievements, and his rewards for passing the trials were slightly increased. Wow, you leveled up again. But seriously, defeating the 9th floor in half a day, that's it, master. Paranet suddenly appears running towards Yujun. That guy just resurrects even if he dies and survives. Seeing that made me realize that the survival instinct skill is really good. Paranet then asks if they will climb up to the 10th floor this way, but the protagonist denies it while sheathing his sword, saying that there is a place they need to pass through before proceeding. There was a dungeon on that floor that he still couldn't find a way to enter, even when playing as an F2P player. A place where he couldn't meet the requirements no matter what he did. If my assumption is correct, this place is probably the entrance to the next stage of the Infernal Difficulty tutorial. Considering all my experience as an F2P player, this is the most likely place. Meanwhile, in the dungeon that Yujun is looking for, there are 2 players, a blonde man and a dark-haired man, who are trying to enter it. Now that we've leveled up, maybe we can get in, the blonde man says, and his friend responds that he is too persistent. Hey, it's a dungeon that no one has accessed. It's a guaranteed jackpot if you can get in. How can you give up on that? The man approaches his hand to the barrier surrounding the large entrance, which only allows entry to those who meet the requirements. As soon as he touches the barrier with his hand, the system issues an alert warning that the dungeon's entry requirements have not been met and that they cannot enter the ancient ruins. Hearing the alert, the dark-haired man decides to give up, already impatient, but his friend stops him. Are you going to keep acting like a loser? It's a dungeon that even the ranked players couldn't access. I wonder what kind of items will drop here. Aren't you even a little excited? The dark-haired man then says that he was certainly excited, but reminds his friend that no one knows how to enter it. It's been more than a month since we started fighting on the 9th floor. How long are you going to keep this up? Even the ranked players gave up and moved on. Do you think we can do something they couldn't? He continues trying to convince his friend, who soon responds that everyone else failed because they lacked perseverance and that he is different, as he will persevere until it works. It's his style. Well, what makes you so special? You're just another player among many. If you were special, you wouldn't be stuck here like this. The dark-haired player says to his friend, who responds seriously, Can you stop demoralizing me? Shut up if you're not going to support me. The black-haired man opens his mouth again, but this time to alert his friend, asking if he had noticed that they were not the only travelers there. Immediately, the blonde becomes alert and questions if someone is coming. Upon hearing footsteps and other sounds indicating the approach of someone, they quickly decide to hide. What's with this guy? Every time. The brunette complains about having to hide every time someone appears. His friend observes the approaching figure and says, "The guy certainly looks like a player. Anyway, there are still people like you who continue to cling to the ancient ruins." They realize that the player who has just arrived at the entrance of the dungeon has very good equipment, which makes them wonder if he might be a rising member of a famous guild. They even think about the possibility of him already knowing how to enter. Let's wait and see. I have a good feeling today. From his expression, he may know something, says the blonde. His skeptical friend replies, "Maybe not. The chances are higher for the latter option. Frankly, no one has been able to enter the dungeon despite many attempts." Wait! The blonde gets up from his hiding place facing the portal. Our protagonist, Yu-jun, approaches his hand to the barrier and without any difficulty manages to cross it, leaving the two who are hiding in disbelief that someone has actually managed to enter this dungeon. They wonder if he really did it and what they should do now. "What else can we do? Run! The entrance portal may still be open," the blonde says, running hastily towards the portal. When he arrives, he is shocked by the barrier, and the system again warns that the entry requirements for the dungeon have not been met. His black-haired friend asks if he is okay. "I'm fine, it's just my nose, but that's not important now. How did that guy satisfy the entry requirements?" the man says as the blonde massages his face in pain and responds, "It's true. We've tried to meet all imaginable requirements to enter, but he manages to. What makes him so special?" The blonde decides to think, leaving his friend outraged that he is still with the idea of staying there. So he presses his nose with the fabric of his clothes and says, "Yes, we can't just give up like this. Let's wait for him to come out and then confront him. I can't stand seeing some random guy monopolizing the items I had my eye on in the ancient ruins." His partner warns that if that's the case, he can count on him. Oh, so it'll be a 5-on-5 confrontation. Already inside the dungeon, Yu-jun and Paranet walk observing every detail of the place. Doesn't this place look good inside? Just by looking? Don't you think there's something here? Yu-jun comments, noticing the drawings on the walls. Paranet responds excitedly. "It certainly looks promising to me. After all, the place where I lived was also a dungeon." Looking at the end of the large corridor, Yu-jun notices a huge image drawn. "Wait, isn't that an altar?" he asks. The Hell difficulty tutorial is advancing to the next phase. Would you like to start the next tutorial? The system warns, as soon as they spot the place. Without hesitation, he approaches the altar and touches his hand to the top, causing an intense light to shine at the same moment. The system begins to explain that before the current players existed, there was the original player, the being who divided the seas, inverted the earth, and flew freely through the skies. This original player was worshipped by all. This seems to be a hologram. What does this mean? I've spent 5 years completing all the missions in War of the Gods, but I've never seen the term original player, Yu-jun comments, looking at the white-haired, red-eyed woman in the hologram. It was the power of the original player that protected this world from the invasion of the ancient races. The original player, who alone defended the invasion of the ancient races, came to be worshipped by the people not only as a hero, but as a figure similar to a god. A god? Is it related to the name of the game, War of the Gods? However, the invasion of the ancient races was not the only challenge that humanity faced. The invasion by demons and their followers soon began, and the original player, who could not stop all the enemies alone, made a decision. She granted abilities to followers with high potential, although their power could not be compared to hers. The addition of the followers who gained the power of the player became a significant force for humanity. Lately, the human forces centered around the original player have managed to repel the invasion of the demons and their followers. It seems to be about the original player. These holograms appear to explain past events, but it's completely different from what I knew about the game. Fortunately, at least the content of the Tower of Infinity hasn't changed, he observed seriously, saying that this ruin seems to be related to the existence of the original player. Considering they started with a history lesson, my assumption seems to be correct. The system then warns that the introduction is over and the trial stage will now begin. Huh? Just like that, without even a yes or no button? What? Where am I? The system alerts that the judgment has begun. Fight and defeat the original player. 0/1. Yu-jun's level has been adjusted to 1. If he fails to defeat the original player, he will fail the attempt of the intermediate Hell difficulty tutorial. What? Level 1? Seriously? My attributes and legendary title have disappeared. Even my equipment has returned to my inventory. Wait, and Paranet? Summon? Summon? He tries to summon Paranet but fails in his attempt, becoming desperate. They're asking me to defeat the original player in this state with nothing? Alone against the monster that annihilated other races and drove away demons and their followers? This test is absurd. They call this a divine test. Yujun holds his chin thoughtfully, deducing that this is a world based on a game, and that if it's a mission, there must be a way to complete it. As expected, I've waited for a long time. My successor has finally arrived. A woman's voice reaches the protagonist's ears, and he looks over his shoulder. Seeing the woman with long white hair wearing a red and black hanbok, she's the original player. After Shin gains access to the dungeon that no one has been able to enter, he finds an altar that leads him to a challenge. "I've been waiting for a long time, successor," says the woman with long white hair wearing a red kimono. Our protagonist then remembers that this woman is the same one he saw in the video a few minutes ago. Equipped with normal clothes and at level 1, an NPC with the incredible title of having defeated an evil god cannot be weak, thinks Entak. Shin wonders if the successor is the person who goes through the hellish tutorial, and if he is that successor. "Wait a minute," he says, agitated, questioning who would expect such an important mission to be hidden in a difficulty level that no one has managed to pass, and asks the woman in red, "What exactly do original player and successor mean?" The original player, level 1, looks at him, slightly wrinkling her face, saying that she cannot answer such a question, as her role is only to verify if the player is qualified. A blue light shines in a small spiral as the woman pulls out a katana. "There's only one thing you have to do today. Here, defeat this body and achieve a glorious victory," says the level 1 player, wielding her sword with one hand while keeping the other behind her back. Our protagonist mentally questions her making a grand entrance, but only using a wooden sword. Soon he decides to take the first step as someone who prefers to avoid fights, asking if the woman agrees. "If we are both level 1 and she uses such equipment, I can dominate her with my stats," thinks Shin, as the woman gestures for him to come forward and agrees to let him act first. After all, they are both level 1. She tells him to use whatever he wants and do what he can, stating that there are few usable weapons up to level 1. "You're going to regret saying that," says Shin Yujun, opening his inventory and selecting a piece of equipment he thought he would never use again. The original player frowns upon seeing him enveloped in light, wondering what it is. "It's the Super Novice set. Today I'll show you what ultimate level 1 equipment looks like," says the protagonist, showcasing his armor, which leaves the woman disappointed. She finds it surprising that someone who should be honing their own strength is relying on superficial items. Shin then questions the player if her appearance isn't too outdated and says, irritated, leaning towards her, "The number of people who focused on skill and ignored equipment and who lost to me easily numbers in the hundreds, you know." In a serious and impatient tone, she replies that the protagonist is as arrogant as he seems, and today he will learn that relying on superficial items is a mistake. "We'll find out who's wrong when we fight," says Shin loudly as he leaps towards his opponent, raising his sword ready to strike. The woman easily defends the protagonist's attack, saying that there isn't even a single level of swordsman in him. He was just attacking like a wild boar. "Watch! Smoothness surpasses strength. This is the essence of a skilled swordsman," she says with a slight smile, but her wooden sword suddenly breaks in half, making her widen her eyes and question what that was. Yujun firmly plants his feet on the ground, a smug smile on his face, and questions her. "What did you just say? Something about how smoothness surpasses strength?" The player is thrown back and clicks her tongue with a grim expression as she hears her opponent's words. She spins her body, doing a somersault to land crouched in an attack position. Still smiling, our protagonist teases her, asking if she would like to repeat what she said about superficial items. "You're quite excited now that you've gained the upper hand," comments the woman, tossing her broken sword behind her, admitting that she underestimated her enemy, but warns that the real battle begins now. A small purple portal is created in the player's hand, from which she pulls out a sword. This time, it's a real sword, with a ruby in its hilt, catching Shin's attention as he wonders if that could be the weapon of the level 1 boss, a hero-grade item. "I'll match the level of your weapon and give you a fitting challenge," says the woman, irritated. The protagonist, surprised, asks for a minute and questions if she isn't changing her attitude too quickly, since she had said this was about skills and not items. "Stop asking questions!" she screams, her scarlet eyes shining. Suddenly, a system message appears before Shin, warning him that he has been exposed to a murderous intent and will be affected by the status effect Fear. "Is this the fear ability used by bosses?" Yujun questions with a frightened expression, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly. Soon, the system warns again, "Composure activated, status effect removed." Shin is even more surprised, while the woman, incredulous, says he managed to recover so quickly after having his spirit broken. "You have some courage," she says, thoughtful, and continues, "But if you can't block this attack, you might die." The original player quickly moves behind Shin, interrupting his sword movement and preventing him from attacking. With a confident smile, she plants her feet on the ground, saying, "I'm going to teach you a lesson. With balanced equipment, the more skilled will always triumph." Our protagonist spins around quickly to face her, but before he can do anything, he is struck on the head and thrown backward, trying to understand how she managed to get past his guard so easily with a single move. Shin Yujun falls on his back to the ground, his expression pale, realizing that she really hit him, but questions if she can deal much damage with a hero-grade weapon when he's using the super novice armor. He remembers that level 1 hero equipment is rare, but wonders who would spend money if the purchased items were inferior to free items. Shin props himself up on the ground and sits up. "What kind of sorcery did you use? I definitely hit you in the head." The woman, desperate, questions loudly upon seeing that Shin was hit without suffering a scratch. He laughs and says, "That's not surprising." He then comments that she would probably be shocked if she knew the cost of his equipment. It's a limited edition money item, usually useless for new users, which can only be used in tutorials. Shin thinks he was lucky to buy it out of a desire to collect items, and never imagined it would be so useful. "You'll need to hit me all day to penetrate my defense and hurt me with just a free hero-grade item," our protagonist says, pressing his foot against the ground, breaking it. "You bastard! Even so, it's cheating if someone doesn't have a scratch after being hit by a swordsman," the original player says, moving her sword to attack Shin again, making him move his arms and grit his teeth as he defends against the sword strikes. Then he swings his sword, telling her to stop with the ineffective blows and recognize him as her successor. Before the protagonist's sword can hit her, she manages to stop him, incredulous that he got past her barrage and even counterattacked. "Impressive. I'll give you credit for your fighting spirit," she says, frowning. Shin grits his teeth with an irritated expression, bringing his fist in front of his face to protect himself. "It's essential to maintain composure even when a blade swings before my eyes." He thinks that just because the damage isn't significant doesn't mean her sword isn't frightening. Several lights flash with the player's attacks, while Shin walks firmly through the area, sinking the ground, thinking that there's still another way. "Yujun's strikes are undoubtedly those of an ordinary person," the woman comments, frowning as she sees that the protagonist has no level in swordsman. However, each of his movements still carries a subtle wisdom in combat. "You seem fine, but the accumulated damage must be painful. And to think you could endure so much," the player says, raising an eyebrow, admitting that he's doing quite well for someone who relies solely on the power of his equipment. "Damn! You have enough defense, but no power." Shin shows a confused expression upon hearing the woman tell him to just give up, but he disagrees, saying it's still too early for that. Shin Yujun swings his sword at the woman, but fails to hit her. "It's useless. It's just a matter of time. It's natural for someone untrained like you to fall first," the player says, a bit of sweat trickling down her face. Soon, the protagonist jumps, looking determined, telling his enemy to save such words for after he defeats her. Our protagonist thinks that if his calculations are correct, a decisive moment is approaching. He just needs to accumulate a bit more damage. Still leaping toward his opponent, he swings his sword to attack her, and with an arrogant smile, she manages to block his strike. However, once again, her sword breaks in half, making her widen her eyes in fear. "The sword broke again? No, I can't avoid it completely," the woman exclaims, not believing she took so much damage from a single blow. She soon falls to her knees before the protagonist. "It may be a hero-grade sword, but it's fragile." The player questions him if he also anticipated this outcome, bringing her hand to her injured shoulder and pressing it. Shin replies that he had a 50% chance of a critical hit. Besides, there's no one else to be the successor, so she should just accept him now. "I'd prefer to hand it over to someone talented, but it seems I have no choice," the woman in red says with a tired expression, unable to believe she lost to a kid who relies solely on the power of his equipment. "Ha! I really can't help but say something. Items are also a skill," Shin says, resting his sword on his shoulders and letting out a sigh. The protagonist, with a smile, turns to his opponent, still kneeling, telling her that there were many players who, like her, believe that skill is the main thing, and asks if she knows what happened to all of them. "I crushed all of them. There are over 100 people who deleted their characters while crying." He continues saying that the system was designed to favor those who spend more money from the beginning, and since he spent more, this is the result. "You're talking nonsense again. Well, the words of a loser are just tired excuses," his opponent says as she starts to be enveloped by a glow. "Even though I don't like it, there's nothing I can do. The results speak for themselves. I lost." The woman looks at him with her red eyes and calmly tells him that, as her successor, he should go further than she could reach. After finally achieving his victory, the system issues a message saying that he defeated the original player and accomplished an impossible feat. Shin finally earned the mythical title of Original Player. After defeating the original player, the system issues a series of notifications about the new title earned by Shin, including the elevation of his racial rank and the acquisition of a legendary item box, as well as leveling up again. Finally, I have returned to my original level, he comments satisfied, as all his achievements are automatically equipped. Anyway, I would have been in trouble without the Super Novice set. Shin reflects that indeed, in games, spending is the safest path. If you abandon your current life and invest heavily, even the most extreme difficulty will become easy. With new system messages appearing, he enjoys his rewards, a 25% increase in all skills, along with receiving extra unallocated points every time he levels up. His eyes shine upon seeing the third benefit, 80 unallocated points. Other benefits are also gained, such as an increase in magic points upon evolving to original player, and a 50% reduction in the equipped item limit, making Shin jump with joy, surrounded by sparkles. Long live the developers! Long live the goddess! He joyfully celebrates his new achievements. Another system panel appears before his eyes, showing his new title, as well as his level and skills. So what if I started 5 years after everyone else? With so much advantage, I can easily catch up to or even surpass them. The protagonist smiles widely, clenching his fists in celebration. I was focused only on agility, but now my low magical power has increased, combined with the attribute rewards at each level. Besides, I've obtained a legendary item box and got another rainbow sticker. With a rainbow sticker and the title bonus applied, I can't even use equipment that requires a level above 150? Great! With this opportunity, I definitely need to upgrade my equipment. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, 2 players watch Shin's progress. How much longer do we have to wait? I'm starting to get sleepy, complains the dark-haired one while the blonde stirs the campfire with a stick. When the time comes, he'll return, and since the portal is so close, we should wait a little longer, replies the blonde. Suddenly he notices a change in the portal and quickly leans against the small wall where they were, tossing aside the stick. The portal is moving! It looks like he's finally coming out! Put out the fire! Put it out! A glow emerges in front of the portal, revealing Shin Yu-jun, now equipped with a green armor and cloak. It seems like time passed faster than I thought since the sun has set. I guess I lost track of time while searching for good equipment, Shin comments, looking around and admiring the Fury set, the gear he had chosen. Known as the mid-game melee uniform, this item is paid and rarely found below level 2501, especially considering that in-game purchases are currently unavailable. It's truly top-tier equipment for his class. And for the weapon, I chose a specialized piece that takes advantage of the increased magical power, he says, pleased with his new set. As the 2 hidden players spot Shin, they are left speechless. Wait, doesn't it look like his equipment has completely changed? The dark-haired man exclaims, while the blonde quickly responds that he must have found something in the dungeon, planning to attack him and steal his items. However, before they can act, they hear Shin's voice. But how long are you going to hide like that? He says with a mischievous smile, his eyes shining threateningly as he suggests they should come out of their hiding spots. Were we caught? The blonde asks, and the dark-haired one, shifting his gaze to the protagonist, realizes there are several other players hiding besides the 2 of them. All the hidden players begin launching attacks toward the portal where Shin is, creating a large cloud of smoke due to the impact of the attacks. What's happening? Who are they? The blonde man asks, while the dark-haired one pulls his scarf over his face to shield himself from the smoke, responding that they seem to be higher-level players and that the blonde should lower his head if he doesn't want to get involved. The mages grip their staffs tightly, creating magic circles that launch bombs in Shin's direction. Judging by the situation, it seems we're outnumbered, says the blonde, convinced, narrowing his eyes as he sees the front of the portal explode. But as the smoke dissipates, it reveals Shin standing intact at the entrance of the dungeon, leaving the duo incredulous. They wonder how someone who was hit by a magical attack could be perfectly fine. Am I seeing things? The blonde questions, and the dark-haired one confirms that Shin is indeed unscathed. Shin realizes he has suffered no damage from the attacks and thinks this must be due to the Fury set. Considering the level of the players who attacked him, he wouldn't take any damage. What's going on? Is this guy really a player? One of the attacking mages asks desperately, while another names him Boss Monster. One of the hooded men shouts for the others not to panic, claiming that this must just be a special effect from an item that Shin obtained in the ancient ruins, capable of blocking area magical attacks. He then orders everyone to keep attacking. Without warning, Shin leaps towards the man, wielding his sword. "I found the leader!" Shin says, startling the man as the protagonist passes by him, breaking his sword and cutting his throat. "Damn! The party leader has fallen! The leader fell to your smiling attack!" exclaims one of the enemies upon seeing they just lost their leader. Shin then questions who they all are to attack him. "Die!" shouts another player, shooting arrows at Shin, but he warns that normal arrows do not penetrate the Fury set and grabs the man by his shirt, lifting him slightly and throwing him against other players who were rushing toward him, knocking them off the large rock. "Where did this monster come from?" questions a man, approaching from behind Shin and trying to hit him in the neck. Mages and long-range archers plus a guardian swordsman as backup. Annoying. Shin notices more magical circles appearing above his head, and suddenly the enemies begin to attack him with lightning, while one of them says he will hold him down. But again, Shin emerges from the smoke with a cough, still smiling, saying, "Sorry, there's not much difference between long-range magic and single-target spells." One of the men looks astonished at the protagonist, wondering how he's still alive, stating that no matter how powerful the item is, it's unlikely it wouldn't have a cooldown time. "You are seriously mistaken. This is not a special effect, it's just exceptionally high defense." Shin walks through the smoke, extending his arm with a small circle around it. "Come forth, Paranet," he invokes, creating a large summoning circle above where Paranet appears, surprising the other players, who recognize the famous summoning beast everyone had been talking about. "Does this mean you're here for me?" Shin asks the man who recognized Paranet, and he confirms that this is exactly why they came to the dungeon. "That's right! These are the ancient ruins we marked. We didn't know the entry requirements and we're looking for them." Shin looks at him with a sarcastic smile, asking what nonsense he is talking about, as the ruins belong to those who arrive first. "Besides, there's something that makes me curious. Are you all targeting me?" The man is left speechless, and upon hearing Shin say that they are all lackeys with separate brains, and that being hunted isn't exactly his style, he becomes even more irritated, thinking it would be an easy task. "My God, I thought this would be an easy job." "Don't be unfair, I'm the only one who's irritated because I was attacked first," says Shin, still smiling, making his opponent increasingly furious. Determined, the man jumps at Shin with his sword, but in a swift movement, Shin skillfully cuts his sword and neck. System messages appear, informing that the original player has the authority to punish players without receiving karma as a penalty for killing them. "Wow, is karma management also automated? That's amazing," comments Shin, surprised. Suddenly he spots Paranet running towards him, praising how incredible her master is. "Let's go back and have a drink today," suggests the hidden blonde man, and the dark-haired one agrees, saying they should celebrate their survival. "Yes, let's celebrate our survival," they conclude, relieved. After finally dealing with all the mess caused by his pursuers, our protagonist reaches the 9th floor, the hidden field, known as the waterfall. He and Paranet find themselves at the top of a large waterfall. "This is where the boss of the 9th floor is hidden," says Shin with a calm expression. Paranet comments that the boss should be hiding there, but there are no signs of monsters, let alone the boss. This was the tricky part of the 9th floor's trial. The boss of this floor is a master of water manipulation, capable of becoming invisible when blending with the water. "So what do we do? Are we going to drain all the water?" asks the knight, looking at the waterfall that flows into a river below. But Shin reassures him, saying there is a more suitable strategy than resorting to brute force. "A strategy?" asks Paranet, intrigued. Shin then explains that it will be super simple. They just need a bait. As soon as he hears this, Paranet jumps without a second thought, causing Shin to lean over to see him fall. A face begins to emerge on the surface of the water, and quickly a creature surfaces, grabbing Paranet with its mouth. "Looks like the bait worked," Shin cheers, letting out a smile as he wields his sword. Without wasting any time, he jumps toward the creature, cutting off its head and freeing Paranet, who falls into the water, followed by his master, who soon surfaces. System messages appear right after their victory, informing that Shin Yu-jun leveled up and defeated the basilisk, acquiring the legendary extreme attack power, in addition to achieving an impossible feat by obtaining a legendary item. "A box of legendary items. The reward is better than expected," says Shin, observing the slain creature in the water. The boss of the 9th floor, Basilisk, is usually challenged in a group, just like the boss of the 5th floor, Troll. However, instead of being in a dungeon, he is hidden in a field, making it possible to challenge him alone, as long as one has sufficient attack power. More system messages inform about his recent battle, revealing that Shin had acquired a legendary title as a reward. Total attack power was increased by 10, and the legendary title, Extreme Attack Power, was earned by Shin before reaching the 10th floor. Legendary titles are more valuable than legendary items, and they can stack infinitely, thinks Shin, determined to regain his past strength by collecting legendary titles one by one while looking at his inventory. Paranet floats in the lake, soon hearing his master's call. So, are we going to the next floor? Finally, on the 10th floor, with huge mountains and trees, the protagonist walks, remembering that there is a hidden dungeon with great rewards on the 10th floor. He decides to check it out, but is aware that, unlike the 9th floor, which was more suitable for beginners, the 10th floor is a dangerous place where high-level players often venture. In other words, someone could die from a stray stone thrown by a high-level player passing by. Even with powerful equipment, Shin could still face problems if he encountered people like those who attacked him in the dungeon. "So, I need to cover my tracks before moving on," says the protagonist, opening his inventory and grabbing a scentless apple, which has the effect of completely masking his presence for 30 minutes. Additionally, all traces he left on the current floor will disappear as soon as his presence is erased. Tracking and detection abilities will not work against him. "I was saving this for assassinations or for a preemptive strike, but I'll have to use it now," Shin says, taking a big bite of the apple. To avoid being detected, he decides to call Paranet back, planning to summon him again when necessary. The system alerts him that now that Shin has consumed the apple, his presence will be masked for 30 minutes. Our protagonist prepares to run, gaining momentum. "Should I go now?" he thinks as he runs toward the hidden dungeon, hoping it is well concealed. "It's a place where many plant, so I'm a bit anxious," reflects Shin. "I found it!" he exclaims, crouching next to a tree and looking around. He had found the cinnamon mine. "It looks exactly as I remember. The hidden dungeon must be inside that mine." Determined, Shin enters the cave and soon hears two women talking ahead. One of them exclaims, calling an enemy a dirty bastard. The protagonist's eyes widen as he realizes they are elves. The shorter one, with white hair and wielding a bow and arrows, says seriously, "Those with dark skin are always trying to take what isn't theirs. That's why they're called the Forsaken Race." The blonde one, with a sword at her waist, warns her to be careful with what she says, as there might be a dark elf hiding, spying on them. Shin observes the elf women hidden behind a tree, discreetly following them while wondering how these elves ended up there. "What should we do? If their power grows anymore, we won't be able to handle them," says the blonde, worried. Her partner agrees, saying they need to fight the dark elves before they become stronger. Shin notices the animosity the elf women have towards the dark elves, but questions why this is happening. As to him, elves and dark elves shouldn't hate each other. Since the elves are part of the interracial alliance, Shin decides it's better to avoid conflict. There are only 2 guards, so should I sneak in when there's a chance? The protagonist thinks aloud, planning how to enter the cave. But he soon realizes there are more elves with the guards, and besides, the effect of the apple is almost wearing off. "I need to find a way to get into the mine quickly without having problems with them," Shin says, opening his inventory in search of a solution. "That's it," he exclaims upon finding a revitalized quince, which greatly increases affinity with nature for 3 days, and the seed of Yggdrasil, a legendary grade item. Shin consumes the quince, knowing that elves are sensitive to someone's affinity with nature. And now the key is this seed of Yggdrasil, because for the elves, the seed of Yggdrasil is a supreme treasure. No, even the word treasure is inadequate to describe it. The mere existence of Yggdrasil can evolve and enhance the abilities of elves, as well as resolve their persistent reproductive difficulties, thinks Shin, holding the seed in his hands. He considers it a waste to use it now, but since he still has 6 of them in his inventory, he decides to go ahead. "What smell is that? Who's there? Show yourself!" shouts the tallest elf, quickly turning towards Shin and brandishing her sword. Soon, her partner realizes it's the smell of a human, and Shin calmly steps out of his hiding place with his hands raised. "Wait, I'll reveal myself. Please don't shoot. I have the seed of Yggdrasil," he says, trying to negotiate. "What? That thing in your hand is really the seed of Yggdrasil?" The tallest elf is surprised, fixating her gaze on the seed in Shin's hand, who notices her reaction and confirms that it is indeed the seed of Yggdrasil. "The smell seems right," says the elf with long white hair, while the smaller one beside her questions if it's real. "Next step," Shin thinks, following his plan. Suddenly, one of the elf women draws her sword and rushes towards Shin. "Wait a minute. There's no way this can be real. Do you know how many of our kind have been hurt by trusting humans?" The inherent distrust of elves towards humans is hard to resolve, even with such a valuable item. Shin wonders what he should do. Then an elf in a white dress adorned with details at the neckline walks towards the protagonist, her long white hair swaying. "Ah, Lady Yodri, one of the guards exclaims upon seeing her pass. As Yodri approaches Shin, she asks if she can take a closer look, and he agrees. Yodri, is she the leader of the group? What I'm holding isn't fake. If she has vision, she'll recognize that it's genuine. But why is she just closing her eyes instead of looking or touching? Shin wonders. Yodri then says she can clearly feel the aura of Yggdrasil. It's hard to believe, but it really is a genuine item. She brings her hand to her mouth in surprise and extends her other hand towards the seed. But Shin quickly pulls it back close to himself, saying that's enough since the leader confirmed its authenticity. Ah, wait a moment, Yodri asks, but Shin inquires if they can talk now before handing over the seed. In the meantime, one of the elves questions whether this human really brought the genuine seed, and another elf warns her that their leader could never be deceived. Wait, does this mean we can also possess a Yggdrasil? Asks a shorter elf to her companions. Great, let's talk, but before that there's something I need to do, Yodri says, visibly agitated by the situation. She asks Shin to confirm that he brought the seed of Yggdrasil to negotiate with them. Yes, that's right. I know that the seed of Yggdrasil is a highly valuable item for elves, Shin replies. The leader confirms that the seed of Yggdrasil is indeed an incomparable treasure for elves. However, narrowing her eyes, she says they cannot agree to the negotiation. What? Why not? Shin asks, rubbing the back of his head as sweat trickles down his face. That's our decision, Yodri says firmly, adding that they cannot agree if the item doesn't work. The seed of Yggdrasil doesn't work? Is there some other reason? Shin wonders, reflecting on her words. After his agreement is rejected by Yodri, our protagonist suggests that if the leader is not satisfied with the seed, he could offer something else. Tell me what you want, he asks. That's not the problem, Yodri replies, her head slightly bowed and her hands clasped in front of her body. It's that we don't have anything valuable enough to trade for the seed of Yggdrasil. Hearing this, Shin becomes excited, his eyes shining with an idea. He asks Yodri if she would like to hear him out. The leader furrows her brow, curious, and then listens to Shin's proposal. Why don't we negotiate items based on our needs instead of their value? Suggests the protagonist. He explains that she would need to fulfill 1 or 2 simple requests, piquing Yodri's interest, who begins to ponder whether he is lying. The agreement needs to be fair for it to proceed without repercussions, she warns. Hey, value is relative, you know, says Shin, raising a finger in the air. Yodri sighs and says she is willing to hear his proposal. It's nothing difficult. I want to enter the mine. Please grant me access. Suddenly, the other elf women revolt, brandishing their weapons. Enter the mine? So you had a secondary motive? Says a short-haired elf, pointing her spear. Another shouts for them to take him down, suspecting he might be a human sent by the Dark Elves. Wait! This is a misunderstanding. I've never met the Dark Elves. Shin surrenders, raising his hands. Yodri raises a hand, asking everyone to stop, and then slowly lowers her hand, saying, I can distinguish truth from lies, and what he said is not a lie. He has no ties with the Dark Elves. Shin thanks her for having this ability to discern the truth, and explains that he only wants to explore the inside of the mine. He emphasizes that he has no interest in the precious cinnamon ore they possess, a resource so valuable it could spark a war. The agreement cannot happen if that is your goal, Yodri says seriously. What is your purpose if it's not the ore? Shin replies that it's a secret, but in exchange for the seed of Yggdrasil, he swears that the elves will not be harmed. He asks Yodri to confirm that he is speaking the truth. Since you are not lying, let's proceed with the agreement, the leader says, deciding to continue but with a condition. To ensure her safety, Shin states that he will hand over the seed after returning safely, assuring Yodri that she has his word on this. I hope you keep that promise. Let's build trust as we move forward with the agreement, Yodri says, leaving Shin a little confused. She then orders 3 of her guards to accompany him inside the mine. Our protagonist walks, dissatisfied with Yodri's trust in assigning 3 elves to monitor him. Although he acts innocently, he remembers that if something goes wrong, he can always escape. Judging by the rookies they chose, they're underestimating my level and equipment. These 3 can be dealt with quickly. Let's move on for now, he thinks, wondering why the mine is so complicated. Surely the structure hasn't changed in the last 5 years. Hey, you're Yujun, right? Asks the smaller elf, moving alongside him. Shin confirms, and shortly after she asks if he is a player from another world. He looks at the smaller elf with a slight smile and replies, That's right, you figured it out just by looking? She looks at the protagonist and comments that he seems different from ordinary people. Moreover, she heard that people from other worlds often like elves, and asks if that's true. Generally, that's the case. No human hates beauty, Shin responds. The small elf leans in a bit more, hands behind her back, and says that Shin seems different from other humans. and that she somehow finds him likable. Shin knows this isn't surprising, thanks to the effect of the revigorated Marmallow, which increased his favorability with the elves. The small elf, with a threatening expression and wide eyes, asks if he prefers dark elves or elves. She stares at him intently while waiting for his answer. The answer is obvious. Without a doubt, it's the elves. Of course, right? The protagonist responds, managing to convince the smaller elf. Suddenly, something comes towards them, and Shin quickly pushes her out of the way to avoid her being hit, ending up with his armor taking the blow instead. Our protagonist looks back at the girls and sees they're being attacked from various directions. The green-haired elf with a bow and arrow crouches beside her partner, who was hit by an arrow, and asks if she is okay. That was impressive for a human. You reacted to the arrow quickly, says the white-haired dark elf, approaching the protagonist with his soldiers, all hooded and dressed in green clothing. Shin observes the invaders, wondering how they managed to infiltrate the elf's mine. "Cariel, how are you here? We ensured the mine was well protected," asks the smaller elf aggressively, wielding her dagger. The dark elf lowers his hood and explains that there is more than one passage, calling her a foolish lackey and saying he rushed over upon hearing that a human possesses the seed of Yggdrasil. "Glad it's not too late. I don't want to talk much, so just give me the seed of Yggdrasil," says the enemy, making Shin question how this information leaked. There must be a spy among the elves who was in contact with the dark elves. "What were you thinking ambushing us? Don't you know that the interracial alliance law is strictly enforced? Conflict is strictly prohibited," shouts the blonde at Cariel, who calls her naive and asks if they should kill everyone there and escape, questioning how anyone could hold them accountable. "Then, human, make the right choice if you want to live," says the leader of the dark elves. Shin perceives the trajectory of the arrow and concludes that they intend to kill them. Handing over the seed now would only put them in more danger. The blonde shouts for Cariel to shut up, stating that they don't know how he obtained the information, but they will never hand over the seed. "Is that so? I warned you," says Cariel. Suddenly, he skillfully moves between Shin and the blonde, heading towards the green-haired archer. He delivers a strong kick to her stomach, launching her against the wall of the mine, and then grabs the head of the long-haired, purple-haired swordswoman, submerging her in the water. The blonde screams Senya's name desperately, while her partner writhes in pain. "So your friend's name is Senya. Don't move if you don't want to see Senya's head roll," Cariel threatens. He looks at the smaller elf and says this was never something low-class minions should have gotten involved in, which makes her furious. Then he turns to the protagonist with a malicious glint in his eyes and a furrowed brow. "Human, as you can see, the elves cannot protect you. If you don't want to die, hand over the seed of Yggdrasil." Judging by his movements, Shin realizes that Cariel is above level 200 and possesses agility that has reached maximum speed. He never imagined encountering someone so specialized in eliminating low-level opponents in a place like this. "Can you really guarantee my life?" Shin asks the enemy, causing the blonde to turn to him and plead that he doesn't do this, as she promised to hand over the seed to them. The protagonist then thinks, the attack and defense bonus from the Fury set activates 3 minutes after the battle starts. About 2 minutes left. Shin looks at the smaller elf, trying to buy more time. Cariel, however, assures the protagonist that not only did he promise to let him live, but he will also ensure that the young elves return safely. Shin tries to stall, thinking he could abandon the elves and join the enemies, but that would leave a bad taste in his mouth. Although he likes business, he hates threats. "If you really want to make a deal, how about freeing the hostages first?" says the protagonist, looking at Cariel, who still held Senya's head. "Are you doubting me?" the dark elf asks irritably, staring into Shin's eyes, who confirms his doubt and questions how he can trust someone who takes hostages. The leader of the dark elves smiles maliciously and says that the human is mistaken, as he has no choice but to hand over the seed. He then asks Shin if he prefers to lose limbs and have the seed ripped from him, demanding that Shin stop talking and hand over the seed. "If you push me, I might just eat the seed," Shin replies calmly, looking at the enemy serenely, which confuses Cariel. "You are very calm. Do you really think you can defeat me after seeing my abilities?" Suddenly, a system message appears for the protagonist, informing him that the effect of the Fury armor has activated, increasing his defense by 30%. The Fury coat effect has also activated, increasing his defense by 10%, and the Fury shoes effect has activated, increasing his speed by 8%. Finally, the Fury gauntlets have activated, increasing his attack power by 15%. "You're right. The moment you gave me time to prepare, you already lost," says the protagonist, looking at his enemy seriously, which leaves Cariel confused. Shin raises his hands and creates a white sphere of energy, an item called Dark Clouds of Skunties, of heroic grade, with the anatem effect created by the alchemist Miter. He releases a large amount of smoke that reduces visibility. Shin throws the sphere forcefully to the ground, forming a dark zone and surprising the enemies. Right after the protagonist uses the item that causes an explosion of smoke, the enemy elves become frightened and start asking what that black smoke was. One of them warns his companions to hold their breath, fearing it might be poisonous gas. "Be careful not to attack our allies," shouts one of the enemies to the others. Suddenly, the enemy leader orders calm among his companions, clarifying that it was just a trick to obscure their vision. "Stop moving and stay alert for any movement," Kiriel tells his subordinates. A system message appears for Shin, informing him that he has consumed a scentless apple and that now his presence will be completely hidden for 30 minutes. "Wait, what is this?" the enemy leader questions, confused and frowning. Suddenly, a sword pierces his stomach. "Right behind me without leaving a trace? How?" Kiriel asks, feeling the sword penetrate him. He tries to understand why he can't sense any human presence, despite being as alert as possible, while the blonde calls out to the protagonist. "This is what happens when you become complacent just based on your level. Real combat is all about the items," says Shin, covering Kiriel's mouth with his hand, while his sword continues to pierce the enemy, who looks at him with a look of despair. The blonde, in desperation, questions the protagonist about the smoke that prevented her from seeing what was happening. Suddenly, the enemies start shouting for their captain to be careful, warning that the human was attacking them. The smaller elf widens her eyes, trying to see, and asks what is happening. Then, seconds later, she sees one of the enemies collapse and the smoke dissipates, revealing Shin standing before her with all the dark elves fallen around. She then gasps in surprise. "Ah, now I can see, Mr. Yujun!" the blonde exclaims, excited. The protagonist confirms that all threats have been eliminated, surprising the smaller elf, who finds it unbelievable that an entire elite squad of dark elves was defeated in an instant. "This is truly ridiculous," says Kiriel, laughing with some blood trickling from his mouth and onto the ground, leaning against the cave wall. He adds, "And to think we will be reduced to this by a mere human with just over level 100. The blonde approaches the dark elf and asks why they did that, as there used to be good relations between their tribes. Kiriel looks at her with a scowl, saying he has no intention of explaining himself. Furthermore, he warns that Lord Stellan will soon arrive to avenge his death. "What? Stellan?" the smaller elf asks, frightened. Shin suddenly approaches Kiriel, wielding his sword. Without warning, he moves the sword towards the enemy's neck, decapitating him, claiming revenge while being the only one who started the attack, the protagonist says with disdain, looking at the defeated enemy. After his victory, a new system message appears, notifying him that his level has increased. The blonde, in desperation, looks at Shin and waves her clenched hands in front of her body. "What do we do? Stellan is coming. He's the most fearsome and skilled among the dark elf warriors." She admits that Yujun is strong, but fighting against Stellan will be very difficult. She then suggests that they retreat and go back. After hearing her, the protagonist questions whether this enemy is really that strong. When Shin first encountered despair in the game, he concluded that there was no choice but to maintain good relations with the Dark Elves. Of course, he died countless times trying to figure out a strategy to defeat Stellan. "Here's the plan. Since a dangerous enemy is on the way, all of you should retreat for now," the protagonist says, watching Senya and her green-haired partner taking health potions. He asks them to inform the others about the separate passage the Dark Elves are using to invade, telling them to prepare. "And you, Yujun?" the smaller elf asks, worried. Yujun shifts his gaze towards her and replies, "If I'm alone, I can move stealthily. It would be a waste to go back now, but for you, considering your condition, even healing again might be difficult." He opens his inventory, pursing his lips, and takes out 3 return stones, handing them to the 3, who cup their hands to receive them. "Using these will allow you to return safely," says the protagonist, thinking it would be better to stay alone and that everyone should leave. The archer clenches her fist around the stone and says she understands the need not to be stubborn, as they would only be a burden in that state. She warns that they will return and request reinforcements. "Good luck," says Shin, watching them disappear in a blue light. As soon as they leave, he sighs in relief for finally being alone. But when he turns around, he comes face to face with the blonde, the smallest of the group who had stayed behind. "Alone? It's just you and me, Mr. Yujun," she says, her cheeks flushed, and then adds that she will accompany him to his destination. She has stealth skills and won't hinder him. She just wants to help as much as she can until the reinforcements arrive. She believes that by finding Stellan, she can buy some time talking to him. The protagonist lowers his head and rubs the top of it, trying to calm down. I will do my best even if I'm alone, the blonde says, looking excited. Shin shifts his gaze toward her, still with one hand on the top of his lowered head. He had hoped to be alone at least once, but apparently there's no way to avoid her. He then remembers that he had already made enemies with the Dark Elves, and therefore should maintain a good relationship with the elves. All right, we don't know when the pursuer will arrive, so let's move, Shin says, lifting his head and gesturing for her to follow him. Yes, sir, the blonde replies, following him. 10 minutes later, a dark elf with long white hair approaches, calling Cariel's name, who is still lying down and injured. He realizes that his ally was attacked from behind and received a final blow, and that the rest of them had also been defeated in the same way. They all suffered fatal wounds and ambushes in open areas. Unless he's blind, the attacker must have stealth skills or vision-obscuring abilities, the dark elf observes, analyzing how the others were attacked. Lord Stellan, we've lost the human trail. There's also a trace of magic from a return stone used, says the fallen dark elf soldier. Stellan shakes his head and crouches down, noticing Shin Yu-jun's odorless apple. I don't see any human traces, but I sense the presence of an elf. Let's follow this lead for now. Besides, the human who killed Cariel has the ability or items to hide his presence and obscure vision. Stay alert. Meanwhile, Shin walks with the blonde right behind him, who asks if he is sure he knows the way. He then replies that he knows more or less. But this path is blocked. Are you sure you know the way? The smaller one asks, sliding her hand along the cave wall. Actually, since I only played the game, I'm not completely sure. Besides, the path may have changed over time. We're here. This is the place, the protagonist says, arriving at his destination. The elf looks around and says there's nothing in that place. It just seems like a dead end. This should be it. Shin rubs his hand on the ground around a crystal and hears the elf asking about the marks. Now it makes sense. Fortunately, it hasn't been resolved yet and is still here, says the protagonist. Soon the blonde sees a blue panel appear before her eyes, informing her that Shin Yu-jun has requested a group formation. Huh? Why are you sending a party request? She questions, looking at the panel. Shin stares at her and says she should accept quickly. He thought they would have more time, but the enemy has already arrived. So it's you, the human who killed our kin, Stellan says in an aggressive tone. Shin replies that it is indeed him, as his ally had tried to kill him first. The dark elf soldier then says they only wanted to take the seed of Yggdrasil. Adjusting his glasses, which allow him to see the levels of enemies, he questions whether it was really necessary to harm his clan. He finds it hard to believe that a human just over level 100 managed to defeat Cariel and the Elders, whose levels are all at 2005. I've already made a deal with the elves. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Shin asks with a smug smile, irritating the enemy. True, it doesn't make sense to talk to an enemy. I don't know how you killed Cariel, but I won't let you have an easy death. Our protagonist then gives a provocative smile to Stellan, asking him to calm down, as killing him won't guarantee that the seed of Yggdrasil will be released. However, the enemy pulls out a scroll and opens it in front of Yu-jun. What if there's a way to obtain an item you want? The enemy says, revealing the inside of the scroll, an item that allows the choice of the desired item after killing the target. What? How do you have that? Shin questions, wide-eyed at seeing the scroll aimed at him. Oh? You know about this scroll? Stellan asks with an evil smile, and soon a system message appears before Shin, informing him that Stellan has chosen the player item, Seed of Yggdrasil, as the target for acquisition. If you enjoyed today's recap and want more manhwa content, subscribe to the channel. We're starting this journey now, and I hope that together we can strengthen this new community. So go ahead and like the video, comment for future parts, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next time.